Welcome, dear seeker of magical mysteries, to a journey through the unanswered questions that linger in the shadows of the wizarding world. Tonight, we shall explore the enigmas that even the greatest magical minds have left unresolved, the secrets that whisper from dusty corners of Hogwarts, and the puzzles that dance just beyond our understanding. As you settle into your cozy chamber, let these ancient mysteries carry you through realms where knowledge meets wonder, where questions matter more than answers, and where the unknown holds its own peculiar magic. Close your eyes and drift into this chronicle of magical enigmas that have captivated minds for generations. In the shadowed corners of magical knowledge, where even the bravest scholars fear to tread, there exists a practice so abhorrent that its very name is whispered only in the darkest hours by those who have glimpsed its terrible truth. The creation of Horcruxes stands as perhaps the most forbidden art in the entire spectrum of magical learning, a violation of natural law so profound that it tears at the very fabric of what it means to be human. Tonight, as you settle deeper into comfort and safety, we explore this darkest of mysteries, not to glorify its evil, but to understand the shadows that make light precious, the depths that give meaning to redemption. The ancient Greeks knew of a dark wizard whose name has become synonymous with the most depraved magical experimentation ever recorded. Herpo the Foul, whose very title speaks to the revulsion his contemporaries felt for his work, stands alone in magical history as the first wizard known to have successfully created a Horcrux. Living in an age when magical knowledge was less regulated and moral boundaries were more fluid, Herpo conducted experiments that would make even modern Death Eaters recoil in horror. His workshop, hidden in caves beneath the Mediterranean cliffs, became a laboratory of soul magic that pushed the boundaries of what magic could accomplish and what humanity could endure. The sparse records that survive from Herpo's time speak of a man consumed by the pursuit of immortality, driven by an obsession that transformed him from a merely ambitious wizard into something approaching a force of malevolent nature. His studies encompassed not just the mechanics of soul division, but the entire spectrum of life and death magic, making him the ancient world's foremost authority on subjects that civilized magical society preferred to ignore entirely. He bred the first basilisk, that 1,000-year serpent whose very gaze could kill, treating the creation of ultimate magical predators as merely one component of his larger research into the intersection of life, death, and magical power. But it was in the realm of soul magic that Herpo achieved his most terrible triumph and established the foundation for horrors that would plague the magical world for millennia to come. The creation of his Horcrux required not just the act of murder, though that was certainly the catalyst, but a series of rituals and preparations so vile that even the fragmentary accounts preserved in the most restricted magical archives refuse to detail them completely. Ancient magical historians, writing centuries after Herpo's death, describe these procedures only in the most oblique terms, suggesting that even scholarly discussion of the subject was considered dangerous to both writer and reader. The process begins, as all accounts agree, with the deliberate act of taking human life. But murder alone, however cold-blooded or premeditated, is insufficient to tear the soul. The magical world has known countless killers throughout its history, from simple criminals to genocidal tyrants, yet none achieved soul division through violence alone. Something more is required, something that goes beyond the mere ending of life to encompass a fundamental rejection of the natural order that governs magical existence. The killer must not only choose to destroy life, but must embrace that destruction as a positive good, must find in the act of murder not regret or even satisfaction, but a form of twisted fulfillment that resonates with forces that exist beyond normal human comprehension. The magical theory underlying Horcrux creation draws upon concepts that legitimate magical scholarship barely acknowledges and certainly does not explore in detail. The soul, in magical understanding, is not a simple binary entity that either exists or does not, but rather a complex magical structure that can be manipulated, damaged, and even partially destroyed through sufficiently powerful and focused magical intervention. Normal magical healing can repair damage to the soul caused by trauma or dark arts exposure, but the intentional splitting that creates Horcruxes represents a different category of injury entirely, one that cannot be undone through conventional means, and that fundamentally alters the essential nature of the person who undergoes the process. The specific incantations and ritual components required for Horcrux creation remain among the most closely guarded secrets in the entire magical world. The single book known to contain explicit instructions, Secrets of the Darkest Art, was removed from even the most restricted magical libraries and is believed to exist in only a handful of copies worldwide. Those who have encountered this tome describe it as more than merely instructional, but actually corrupting. Its very pages infused with magical influence that affects readers in ways that extend far beyond simple knowledge acquisition. The book appears to actively encourage its own use, whispering suggestions and rationalizations that make the Horcrux creation process seem not just possible, but desirable to minds already inclined toward darkness. Hermione Granger's reaction upon reading even portions of this work provides insight into the psychological impact that mere theoretical knowledge of Horcrux creation can have on even the strongest and most morally grounded individuals. Her visible distress and immediate desire to abandon the research suggests that understanding the process, even academically, leaves permanent marks on the psyche of anyone who gains such knowledge. The book apparently contains not just instructions but philosophical frameworks that attempt to justify soul division as a form of magical evolution, presenting arguments that even those firmly opposed to dark magic find disturbingly compelling. The mystery of what additional steps beyond murder are required for successful soul splitting has generated centuries of speculation among magical theorists brave enough to engage with the subject at all. Some scholars believe that the process requires specific magical preparations that must be undertaken before the killing, rituals that prime the soul for division and create the magical conditions necessary for the split to occur. Others theorize that the critical element is psychological rather than magical, requiring the murderer to achieve a specific mental state that completely eliminates empathy, regret, or any connection to normal human emotion during the act of killing. A third school of thought, represented primarily by researchers who study the intersection of magical theory and spiritual philosophy, suggests that successful soul division requires not just the absence of moral feeling, but the active embracing of evil as a positive force. According to this theory, the would-be Horcrux creator must not merely commit murder, but must find in that act a form of spiritual fulfillment that resonates with the darkest forces in magical reality. They must choose evil not from desperation or anger, but from genuine conviction that destruction and suffering represent higher forms of existence than creation and compassion. The magical mechanics of anchoring a torn soul fragment to a physical object present their own complex set of theoretical problems that even dark arts experts have struggled to understand completely. The object chosen to house the soul fragment must presumably possess certain magical properties that allow it to sustain the kind of spiritual energy that a human soul represents, yet it cannot be so magically active that it overwhelms or distorts the soul fragment it contains. The balance required suggests a level of magical craftsmanship that extends far beyond simple dark arts knowledge, into realms of magical artifice that few practitioners in any generation possess. Tom Riddle's choice of objects for his Horcruxes reveals sophisticated understanding of magical resonance and spiritual compatibility that suggests years of research and experimentation before his first successful soul division. The diary that contained his 16-year-old self was not selected randomly, but represented a perfect marriage of magical potential and personal significance, an object that could house his soul fragment while actively working to fulfill his long-term goals. The ring that bore the resurrection stone combined family heritage with magical power in ways that created ideal conditions for Horcrux creation, while Hufflepuff's cup and Slytherin's locket provided reservoirs of accumulated magical energy built up over centuries of use by powerful wizards. The transformation that occurs in the Horcrux creator's remaining soul appears to be progressive rather than instantaneous, a gradual corruption that accelerates with each additional division until the original personality becomes almost unrecognizable. Voldemort's physical transformation from the handsome and charismatic Tom Riddle into something barely recognizable, as human suggests that soul division affects not just spiritual essence, but actual physical form, reshaping the body to reflect the increasingly fractured and corrupted nature of the spirit it houses. This physical degradation appears to be irreversible, continuing even when the wizard takes steps to protect and preserve their remaining life force through other magical means. The psychological effects of Horcrux creation extend beyond simple moral corruption to encompass fundamental changes in how the afflicted individual perceives and interacts with reality. Normal human emotions become increasingly difficult to access and understand. Not just positive feelings like love and compassion, but even basic survival instincts that depend on emotional processing. Fear, anger, and desire remain accessible, but become distorted into forms that bear little resemblance to normal human experience, transformed into driving forces that operate according to purely magical rather than psychological principles. The question of whether Horcrux creation provides genuine immortality or merely extended life remains hotly debated among the few scholars willing to engage with the subject at all. While the soul fragments anchored in physical objects clearly prevent true death, they do not appear to provide protection against other forms of magical destruction or spiritual dissolution. The Horcrux creator remains vulnerable to techniques that target the soul directly rather than simply ending physical life, and may actually become more susceptible to certain forms of magical attack that specifically target divided or corrupted spiritual essence. The mysterious case of Harry Potter as an accidental Horcrux provides the only detailed first-hand account of what it means to house a fragment of another person's soul, and his experiences suggest that the process affects both the host and the soul fragment in ways that traditional Horcrux theory does not anticipate. The pain Harry experienced when Voldemort was particularly active reveals a form of spiritual resonance that appears to work both ways, creating a connection that allows influence to flow in both directions rather than simply anchoring the soul fragment in its chosen object. The failure of magical healing to completely remove Harry's Horcrux status suggests that soul magic operates according to principles that conventional healing magic cannot address, existing at levels of magical reality that normal therapeutic techniques simply cannot reach. Only the willing sacrifice that destroyed Voldemort's soul fragment while leaving Harry alive demonstrates a form of magical intervention that works with rather than against the deep spiritual forces that govern life and death in the Rain's magical world. The broader implications of Horcrux magic for understanding the nature of magical consciousness remain largely unexplored, as few researchers are willing to risk the spiritual contamination that appears to result from intensive study of soul division techniques. The existence of Horcruxes suggests that magical consciousness is far more complex and manipulable than most magical theory acknowledges, operating according to principles that challenge fundamental assumptions about the relationship between mind, soul, and magical ability. The question of whether techniques similar to Horcrux creation might exist that could divide the soul without requiring murder or moral corruption represents one of the most intriguing and dangerous areas of theoretical magical research. If the essential principle of soul division could be separated from the evil required to achieve it, the implications for magical medicine and consciousness research would be profound. However, the complete absence of any such techniques in the historical record suggests either that no such methods exist or that their discovery would require research so dangerous that even the most ambitious magical theorists have refused to pursue it. The mystery of how Herpo the Foul first discovered the principles of Horcrux creation remains one of the great unsolved questions in magical history, as there is no record of earlier experiments in soul magic or any indication of how he developed the theoretical framework necessary for such work. His success suggests either remarkable innovative genius or access to knowledge that has since been lost or deliberately suppressed, knowledge that may have come from sources that existed outside normal magical tradition entirely. The relationship between Horcrux creation and other forms of dark magic remains poorly understood, though the few accounts that exist suggest that soul division amplifies and enhances other forms of magical corruption in ways that create cascading effects throughout the practitioner's entire magical repertoire. Spells that were once difficult become effortless. Magical techniques that required careful preparation can be performed instantly, and the boundaries that normally limit magical power begin to dissolve in ways that may be as dangerous to the caster as they are to their intended victims. As the night deepens around you and sleep beckons with gentle persistence, remember that even the darkest magical mysteries serve to illuminate the preciousness of wholeness, the beauty of an undivided soul, and the profound courage required to choose love over power, connection over dominance, life over the mere avoidance of death. The horrors that men like Herpo and Voldemort chose represent not magical advancement, but spiritual catastrophe, cautionary tales written in shadow to help us better appreciate the light that defines our better nature. In the deepest vaults of magical knowledge, where reality bends upon itself like starlight caught in crystal, lies perhaps the most dangerous and beautiful of all magical arts: the manipulation of time itself. The time turner, that small golden device that spins backward through moments like a compass seeking true temporal north, represents only the most refined expression of magical principles that stretch back to the very foundations of wizarding civilization. Tonight, as the present moment carries you gently toward dreams, we shall explore the labyrinthine mysteries of temporal magic, where cause and effect dance in patterns too complex for linear minds to fully comprehend. The mechanics of time-turner operation remain one of the most closely guarded secrets in the Department of Mysteries, understood by perhaps a dozen individuals worldwide, and protected by oaths that bind their knowledge even beyond death. The device itself appears deceptively simple, little more than an hourglass pendant suspended on a delicate chain, yet its creation requires magical craftsmanship that pushes the boundaries of what individual wizards can accomplish within a single lifetime. The sand within its chambers is not ordinary quartz, but particles of crystallized temporal energy, each grain containing moments of captured time that have been extracted from the flow of ordinary experience and concentrated into physical form. The theoretical foundation underlying all temporal magic rests upon principles that challenge fundamental assumptions about the nature of magical reality itself. Time, in the magical understanding, is not the immutable constant that Muggle physics describes, but rather a form of magical energy that can be manipulated, redirected, and even temporarily reversed through sufficiently powerful and precisely focused magical intervention. The flow of temporal energy follows patterns that are predictable but extraordinarily complex, creating currents and eddies that skilled temporal theorists can learn to read and navigate with something approaching scientific precision. Ancient magical civilizations appear to have possessed far more sophisticated understanding of temporal manipulation than exists in the modern magical world, though the evidence for their achievements exists primarily in archaeological fragments that resist conventional interpretation. Runic inscriptions found in Celtic stone circles describe temporal workings that would dwarf the capabilities of modern time-turners, speaking of rituals that could stretch single moments into hours or compress entire seasons into heartbeats. These descriptions may represent metaphorical rather than literal truth, but the magical residue that still clings to these ancient sites suggests that something extraordinary was indeed accomplished by wizards whose names have been lost to history. The creation of even a single time-turner requires resources and expertise that explain why such devices remain extraordinarily rare throughout the magical world. The temporal sand must be harvested from moments of profound magical significance, events where the normal flow of time becomes disrupted through the intersection of powerful magical forces. Natural temporal distortions occur during certain types of spellcasting, around areas where multiple powerful curses have been layered upon each other, and in locations where great magical trauma has torn temporary holes in the fabric of space and time itself. The process of extracting temporal energy from these disrupted moments requires magical techniques that border on the impossible, demanding not just enormous skill, but the ability to work within time streams that operate according to non-linear principles. The artificer must perform precise magical operations while experiencing time at different rates simultaneously, maintaining concentration across temporal gradients that would drive ordinary minds into madness within minutes. The margin for error is essentially zero, as mistakes in temporal manipulation tend to create paradoxes that can unravel not just the working, but the entire timeline containing it. The psychological effects of regular time-turner use extend far beyond the simple disorientation that most users experience during their first encounters with temporal displacement. Extended exposure to non-linear time flow appears to fundamentally alter human consciousness in ways that magical medicine cannot fully predict or control. Users report experiencing memories that belong to future versions of themselves, moments of prescient awareness that suggest their consciousness is beginning to exist across multiple temporal states simultaneously. These effects are generally reversible if time-turner use is discontinued, but cases of permanent temporal dissociation have been documented among users who exceeded recommended exposure limits. The mystery of what happens to consciousness during temporal displacement remains one of the most profound questions in magical psychology, touching upon fundamental issues about the nature of identity and continuity of experience. When Hermione Granger traveled backward 3 hours to attend additional classes, what happened to the consciousness that would normally have experienced those 3 hours in linear sequence? Did her awareness simply skip over that period, creating gaps in her subjective experience? Or did some part of her mind remain connected to the original timeline while her physical body moved through the displaced temporal flow? The theoretical implications become even more complex when considering the effects of multiple simultaneous temporal displacements or situations where time-turner users encounter their past or future selves. Each version of the individual presumably possesses complete consciousness and subjective experience, yet they are fundamentally the same person existing at different points along their personal timeline. The question of which version represents the real individual becomes not just philosophically interesting but practically urgent when considering the psychological integration that must occur when the temporal loops are finally resolved. The phenomenon of temporal madness, that mysterious affliction that supposedly strikes wizards who see their past or future selves, may represent not mental illness in any conventional sense, but rather a form of consciousness, fragmentation that occurs when individual awareness attempts to exist simultaneously across multiple temporal states. The human mind appears to be structured around the assumption of linear temporal experience, and exposure to non-linear time flow may trigger defensive responses that manifest as apparent insanity, but actually represent attempts to maintain psychological coherence under impossible circumstances. The destruction of all time turners during the Battle of the Department of Mysteries represents either extraordinary coincidence or evidence of underlying forces that actively work to limit temporal manipulation within the magical world. The devices were supposedly destroyed by accident during the chaos of combat, yet the complete and simultaneous failure of objects that had functioned reliably for centuries suggests deliberate intervention by magical forces that operate beyond human understanding. The timing of this destruction, occurring just as Voldemort's return brought increased instability to the magical world, may indicate that temporal manipulation becomes increasingly dangerous during periods of great magical upheaval. The absence of any new time-turner construction in the years following their destruction provides additional evidence that the knowledge required for their creation may be more fragile and specialized than official sources acknowledge. If the techniques were well documented and understood by multiple artificers, replacement devices should have appeared within months or years of the original's destruction. The continued absence suggests either that crucial knowledge was lost along with the devices themselves, or that deliberate decisions were made to prevent replacement, possibly due to dangers that were not previously acknowledged publicly. The relationship between time-turner operation and other forms of temporal magic remains poorly understood, though scattered evidence suggests that natural time manipulation may be far more common than generally recognized. Prophetic dreams, prescient visions, and the occasional apparent foreknowledge displayed by certain witches and wizards may all represent forms of consciousness that naturally operate across multiple temporal states simultaneously. These phenomena suggest that the human magical consciousness possesses inherent temporal capabilities that time-turners merely amplify and focus, rather than create entirely. The question of whether time travel creates parallel timelines or operates within a single malleable temporal flow has profound implications for understanding the moral and practical consequences of temporal manipulation. If each use of a time-turner creates alternate realities that diverge from the original timeline, then temporal magic represents not just personal risk, but potential responsibility for the welfare of entire alternate versions of magical civilization. The actions taken during temporally displaced periods would affect not just the immediate timeline, but potentially infinite variations of reality that branch off from each moment of temporal intervention. Alternatively, if temporal magic operates within a single timeline that can be modified through careful intervention, then time-turner users bear enormous responsibility for maintaining the integrity of causality itself. Every action taken during temporal displacement must be weighed against its potential consequences for the entire flow of historical events, creating ethical obligations that extend far beyond normal considerations of right and wrong. The burden of such responsibility may explain why time-turner use was so strictly regulated, and why the knowledge required for their creation was guarded so jealously. The mystery of fixed versus changeable temporal events represents one of the most fundamental questions in temporal theory. with implications that extend throughout magical philosophy and ethics. Some events appear to be temporally stable, occurring consistently regardless of time-turner intervention, while others seem malleable and subject to modification through careful temporal manipulation. The principles that determine which events fall into which category remain unknown, though they may relate to the magical significance of the events themselves, rather than their apparent importance from a purely historical perspective. The existence of prophecies and other forms of magical prediction suggests that certain future events possess a form of temporal reality that transcends their apparent contingency upon present actions. These future events may exist as attractors within the temporal flow, drawing the timeline toward their fulfillment through mechanisms that operate beyond conscious understanding or deliberate magical intervention. The relationship between prophecy and free will becomes particularly complex when considering that time-turner users might theoretically travel forward to observe prophesied events, creating temporal loops where knowledge of the future influences actions that bring that future about. The theoretical possibility of temporal paradoxes represents perhaps the greatest danger inherent in any form of time magic, as contradictions in causality may threaten not just individual timelines, but the entire structure of reality itself. The grandfather paradox, where temporal travelers prevent their own birth, represents only the most obvious form of such contradictions. More subtle paradoxes might arise from seemingly minor changes that cascade through history to create fundamental alterations in the conditions that made the original time travel possible. The magical world's approach to paradox prevention appears to rely heavily on the principle of temporal self-consistency, the idea that the timeline possesses inherent stability that resists major alterations and tends to root around minor changes in ways that preserve overall historical continuity. This principle suggests that time possesses a form of magical consciousness, or at least operates according to principles that favor stability over change, actively working to minimize the impact of temporal manipulation on the broader flow of events. The question of whether consciousness itself possesses inherent temporal properties that extend beyond normal linear experience touches upon some of the deepest mysteries in magical theory. Dreams, meditation, and certain forms of magical trance appear to provide access to non-linear temporal experience, suggesting that human awareness may naturally operate across multiple temporal dimensions simultaneously. These phenomena may represent vestigial capabilities that were more developed in earlier stages of magical evolution, or they might indicate potential for temporal awareness that could be developed through proper training and practice. The relationship between memory and time in magical consciousness presents additional theoretical complexities that challenge conventional understanding of both psychological and temporal phenomena. Magical memories appear to possess temporal properties that distinguish them from ordinary recollections, maintaining connections to the original moments that created them in ways that allow past events to continue influencing present experience. The pensieve and similar devices that manipulate magical memory may actually be forms of temporal magic that allow users to revisit past moments, not just mentally, but in some sense, temporally. The mystery of temporal healing and its relationship to conventional magical medicine represents an unexplored frontier in magical theory that could revolutionize approaches to treating magical injuries and illnesses. If consciousness and magical ability naturally operate across multiple temporal states, then certain forms of damage might be treatable by accessing earlier temporal versions of the affected individual. Such techniques would require extraordinary precision and understanding of temporal mechanics, but they might provide solutions to magical conditions that are currently considered untreatable through conventional means. The question of whether natural temporal magic exists independently of artificial devices like time turners opens possibilities for magical development that extend far beyond current understanding. Ancient magical texts hint at techniques for achieving temporal displacement through pure magical ability, without requiring physical devices or external tools of any kind. These references may be metaphorical rather than literal, but they suggest that the deepest understanding of temporal magic involves integration of temporal awareness with magical consciousness at levels that transform the practitioner's fundamental relationship to time itself. The implications of temporal magic for understanding the nature of magical reality itself are profound and largely unexplored, touching upon questions that challenge the basic assumptions underlying magical theory and practice. If time can be manipulated through magical means, what does this suggest about the relationship between consciousness, reality, and the fundamental forces that govern magical existence? The answers to such questions might revolutionize magical understanding, but they would also require forms of research that push the boundaries of what individual minds can safely comprehend. As the gentle currents of night carry you deeper into rest, let the mysteries of temporal magic remind you that time itself is a gift to be treasured, each moment a unique jewel that gains its value, not from its duration, but from the consciousness that experiences it. The wizards who sought to master time through artificial means perhaps missed the deeper magic that lies in simply being present to the eternal now, finding in each passing second an infinity of possibility that no device could ever capture or control. In the shadowed heart of the Department of Mysteries, where the deepest secrets of magical existence are studied by those brave enough to peer beyond the veil of ordinary understanding, there stands an artifact so ancient and enigmatic that its very presence seems to whisper of realms beyond mortal comprehension. The veil, that tattered curtain of deepest black hanging within its crumbling stone archway, represents perhaps the most profound mystery in the entire magical world. A threshold between existence and whatever lies beyond that has captivated and terrified magical minds for countless generations. Tonight, as you rest in the safety of the known world, we shall explore this ultimate boundary, this doorway that opens only one way, this testament to mysteries that may forever remain beyond human understanding. The chamber that houses the veil bears all the hallmarks of a place designed for ceremony rather than mere storage or study. Its amphitheater configuration suggesting that countless witnesses once gathered to observe whatever rituals or events took place around this mysterious portal. The stone benches that descend in concentric circles toward the central dais speak of an age when magical society possessed different relationships to death and the unknown, when perhaps the boundary between life and whatever follows was treated not as an absolute barrier, but as a passage that could be approached, studied, and even traversed under proper circumstances. The architecture itself provides clues to the veil's immense antiquity, as the stonework displays characteristics that predate not only the Ministry of Magic, but potentially the entire recorded history of Wizarding Britain. The blocks from which the amphitheater is constructed show signs of having been shaped by magical techniques that have been lost to modern artifice, their surfaces bearing subtle markings that seem to shift and change when observed from different angles. These inscriptions, if such they are, resist all attempts at translation or interpretation, suggesting that they may represent forms of magical writing that operate according to principles fundamentally different from any known magical language. The veil itself defies conventional magical analysis in ways that have frustrated researchers for centuries, its fabric appearing to be woven from darkness itself rather than any material that exists within normal reality. The substance responds to neither magical detection spells nor mundane physical examination, existing in a state that seems to transcend ordinary categories of matter and energy. When touched, it feels neither warm nor cold, neither rough nor smooth, but rather seems to absorb sensation itself, creating an experience of contact that most researchers describe as profoundly unsettling rather than merely strange. The gentle movement of the veil's fabric in the complete stillness of its chamber represents perhaps the most mysterious aspect of its behavior, as no natural force appears to account for its constant, subtle motion. The air within the death chamber remains perfectly motionless, yet the black curtain continues to flutter with the suggestion of winds that blow from realms beyond ordinary atmospheric phenomena. This perpetual motion has continued without variation for as long as records have been kept, suggesting that whatever forces animate the veil operate according to principles that exist entirely outside the natural laws that govern the physical world. The varying reactions that different individuals experience when approaching the veil provide the clearest indication of its true nature, as something that exists at the intersection of the material and spiritual worlds. Those with strong skeptical inclinations often perceive nothing more than an unusual architectural curiosity, while individuals possessed of deeper spiritual sensitivity report hearing voices, music, or sounds that seem to emanate from beyond the curtain. These auditory phenomena appear to be genuine rather than hallucinatory, as they often contain information or communications that the listener could not have known through normal means. Luna Lovegood's ability to hear clear voices speaking from beyond the veil demonstrates the relationship between magical sensitivity and perception of phenomena that exist beyond ordinary reality. Her matter-of-fact acceptance of communication from the departed suggests that for some individuals, the boundary between life and death may be far more permeable than conventional magical theory acknowledges. The voices she perceives are not random or chaotic, but appear to represent actual communication attempts from consciousness that has passed beyond the material world, yet maintains some form of existence and awareness. Harry Potter's more limited but still significant perception of sounds from beyond the veil indicates that his experiences with death and resurrection have enhanced his sensitivity to phenomena that exist at the boundary between life and its alternatives. His ability to hear something, even if less clearly than Luna, suggests that exposure to the deepest forms of life and death magic may permanently alter an individual's capacity to perceive realities that exist beyond normal human experience. This enhanced perception comes with its own burdens, as awareness of realms beyond death can make ordinary life seem less immediate and compelling. The tragic loss of Sirius Black through the veil provides the only documented case of someone passing through this mysterious portal, yet even this event raises more questions than it answers about the nature of whatever lies beyond. Sirius fell backward through the curtain during his duel with Bellatrix Lestrange, but his passage was observed by multiple witnesses who reported conflicting accounts of what they saw occur. Some described his simply disappearing the moment he contacted the fabric, while others reported seeing his form become translucent or shadowy before fading from view entirely. The immediate aftermath of Sirius's passage revealed no disturbance in the veil's appearance or behavior, as if the portal had absorbed a human being without experiencing any change or disruption to its fundamental nature. This suggests that the veil's function may be not merely to provide access to some other realm, but to serve as a form of spiritual processing mechanism that transforms whatever passes through it in ways that prevent any possibility return. The absolute finality of this transformation explains why no rescue attempt was even contemplated, as all present understood instinctively that whatever had happened to Sirius was irreversible. The historical records of the Department of Mysteries contain tantalizing references to earlier incidents involving the veil, though these accounts are fragmentary and often contradictory, suggesting that knowledge of its true nature has been deliberately obscured or naturally degraded over time. Medieval manuscripts describe rituals conducted around the archway that involved voluntary passage through the veil by individuals seeking transcendence or transformation, though whether these accounts represent historical fact or mythological invention remains unclear. The tone of these descriptions suggests that such passages were undertaken not from desperation but from spiritual conviction, implying that earlier magical societies may have possessed understanding of the veil's purpose that has since been lost. The possibility that the veil served as a form of voluntary spiritual transition for ancient magical communities opens disturbing questions about what may have motivated such practices and what forms of knowledge or experience might have justified them. Archaeological evidence from similar sites throughout Europe suggests that certain magical cultures developed sophisticated understanding of death and afterlife states that led them to view physical existence as merely one phase of a longer spiritual journey. The veil may represent the surviving remnant of magical technologies designed to facilitate such transitions under controlled circumstances. Alternative theories suggest that the veil's original purpose may have been far darker, serving as a method of execution or banishment that removed individuals from existence so completely that even their memory could be erased from history. The amphitheater setting would support such interpretations, providing space for witnesses to observe the final fate of criminals or enemies who had been condemned to this ultimate punishment. Such usage would explain the profound sense of finality that surrounds the veil and the instinctive fear it evokes even among those who cannot perceive its spiritual dimensions directly. The relationship between the veil and other death-related magical phenomena remains poorly understood, though certain connections suggest that it may be part of a larger network of sites or objects that facilitate interaction between the world of the living and whatever realms exist beyond physical death. Similarities have been noted between the spiritual emanations detected around the veil and those associated with certain ancient burial sites, particularly those where powerful magical individuals were interred according to rituals that have been lost to modern knowledge. These connections may indicate that the veil represents one manifestation of magical principles that were once understood more broadly, but have been reduced to isolated fragments through historical accident or deliberate suppression. The theoretical implications of the veil's existence for understanding the nature of consciousness and identity extend far beyond simple questions about survival after death, touching upon fundamental issues about what it means to exist as an individual awareness in a universe where such awareness can apparently be transferred, transformed, or translated between different states of being. If consciousness can pass through the veil into some other form of existence, what does this suggest about the relationship between mind, soul, and the physical structures that normally house them? The answers to such questions might revolutionize magical understanding of identity and continuity of experience. The absence of any known method for communication with whatever lies beyond the veil represents one of the most frustrating limitations in magical research into death-related phenomena, as it prevents any direct investigation of what happens to consciousness after physical death. Unlike ghosts, who maintain some connection to the physical world, or portraits, which preserve aspects of personality and memory, whatever passes through the veil appears to become completely inaccessible to normal magical investigation. This absolute separation suggests that the transition involves fundamental changes in the nature of existence that prevent any form of return or ongoing communication. The question of whether passage through the veil represents destruction of consciousness or transformation into some other state of being has profound implications for how magical society approaches questions of mortality and the value of physical existence. If the veil destroys whatever passes through it, then its existence represents a form of ultimate annihilation that makes death appear merciful by comparison. However, if passage through the veil involves transformation into some other form of existence, then it might represent not ending, but rather metamorphosis into states of being that transcend physical limitations entirely. The magical resonance that sensitive individuals detect around the veil suggests that it remains actively connected to whatever realm or reality it provides access to, serving not merely as a historical artifact, but as an ongoing portal that maintains its original function, despite the passage of centuries or millennia since its creation. This active connection implies that the veil continues to serve its intended purpose, whatever that might have been, and that it remains as dangerous and mysterious today as it was when first constructed by wizards whose names and motivations have been lost to history. The complete absence of any protective barriers or warning systems around the veil indicates either remarkable confidence in its inherent safety or profound indifference to the possibility of accidental passage through it. Unlike other dangerous artifacts in the Department of Mysteries, which are typically surrounded by multiple layers of protective magic and monitoring systems, the veil stands exposed and accessible to anyone who might venture into its chamber. This accessibility may reflect understanding that the veil itself provides the ultimate protection against misuse, as anyone foolish enough to approach it carelessly would be eliminated by their own recklessness. The psychological effects of prolonged exposure to the veil's presence appear to vary dramatically among individuals, with some researchers reporting feelings of profound peace and spiritual clarity, while others experience increasing anxiety and disorientation that can progress to more serious forms of mental disturbance. These varying reactions may depend upon the individual's fundamental orientation toward death and the unknown, with those who fear mortality finding the veil's presence deeply threatening, while those who have made peace with their own mortality may find it oddly comforting. The intensity of these psychological responses suggests that the veil affects not just conscious awareness, but deeper levels of psychic functioning that operate below the threshold of ordinary perception. The question of whether multiple veils exist in other locations around the magical world remains officially unanswered, though scattered references in ancient texts suggest that the London example may be part of a larger network of similar portals that were constructed by civilizations whose understanding of death and spiritual transformation exceeded anything in modern magical knowledge. Archaeological expeditions have identified sites with similar architectural features in remote locations throughout Europe and beyond, though none have been confirmed to contain active portals comparable to the one housed in the Department of Mysteries. The possibility that other functional veils remain hidden in forgotten ruins or inaccessible locations adds additional dimensions of mystery to an already profoundly enigmatic phenomenon. The relationship between the veil and prophecy, or other forms of magical prediction, represents another unexplored area of research, as some theorists have suggested that the portal may provide access not just to realms beyond death, but to states of existence where time operates according to different principles entirely. If consciousness that passes through the veil continues to exist in some form, it might gain access to perspectives on past and future events that could theoretically be communicated back to the physical world through appropriate magical techniques. The development of such communication methods would require breakthrough advances in magical theory that might take generations to achieve, but the potential insights into the nature of time and causality could justify extraordinary research efforts. The mystery of what forces or intelligences might have been responsible for the veil's creation opens speculative possibilities that extend far beyond conventional magical theory into realms that approach theological or cosmological questions about the fundamental nature of reality itself. The sophistication required to construct a stable portal between different states of existence suggests technological and theoretical capabilities that far exceed anything in recorded magical history, implying either that ancient magical civilizations achieved levels of understanding that have since been lost, or that the veil represents the work of entities whose nature and motivations remain completely unknown to human understanding. As the quieter hours of night deepen around you and the boundaries between waking and sleeping begin to blur like veils themselves, let the mystery of this ancient threshold remind you that some doorways are meant to be contemplated rather than crossed, some boundaries respected rather than challenged. The veil stands as testament to the profound courage required to live fully within the realm of the known while acknowledging the vast mysteries that surround our small islands of certainty, finding peace not in answers, but in the humble recognition that the deepest questions may be more beautiful than any resolution we could imagine. In the vast tapestry of magical knowledge, where spells weave through reality like golden threads binding the possible to the actual, there exists a fundamental question that has puzzled magical theorists for millennia. What are the true boundaries of magical power, and what immutable laws govern the exercise of forces that seem to transcend every natural limitation? The mysteries surrounding Gamp's law of elemental transfiguration and the deeper principles that constrain magical ability represent some of the most profound enigmas in wizarding understanding, touching upon questions that bridge magical practice with the deepest philosophical inquiries about the nature of reality itself. Tonight, as you rest in the comfort of certainty, we shall explore these fundamental limitations, these invisible walls that even the most powerful magic cannot breach, these eternal constants that give meaning to magical possibility by defining what remains forever impossible. The legendary Gamp's law stands as perhaps the most concrete example of magical limitation in all of wizarding knowledge, yet its very existence raises more questions than it answers about the fundamental nature of magical power and the forces that constrain its exercise. Named after the wizard who first formulated these principles in systematic form, though certainly not the first to observe the phenomena they describe, the law articulates 5 primary exceptions to the otherwise seemingly unlimited possibilities of elemental transfiguration. These exceptions represent not arbitrary restrictions imposed by magical tradition or governmental regulation, but rather fundamental characteristics of magical reality that appear to operate according to principles that exist beyond human understanding or control. The first and most widely known exception involves the creation of food from nothing, a limitation that Hermione Granger articulates with characteristic precision when she explains that food cannot be conjured from empty air, but must be summoned from existing sources, transformed from other materials, or multiplied from smaller quantities already present. This restriction suggests that magical energy, however powerful, cannot create the complex molecular structures and life-sustaining properties that define nutritious food, implying that certain forms of organization and complexity exist beyond the reach of even the most sophisticated transfiguration techniques. The theoretical implications of this limitation extend far beyond simple questions of magical convenience into fundamental issues about the relationship between magical energy and biological necessity. Food represents not merely matter arranged in particular configurations, but life force itself, concentrated and transformed into forms that can sustain consciousness and magical ability within living beings. The inability to create such substances through transfiguration suggests that life force operates according to principles that transcend ordinary magical manipulation, existing as a fundamental property of reality that can be moved, transformed, or concentrated but never truly created from nothing. The remaining 4 exceptions to Gamp's law remain shrouded in mystery, their specific nature known only to the most advanced magical theorists and carefully guarded as some of the deepest secrets in wizarding knowledge. Speculation about these hidden limitations has generated centuries of theoretical work among scholars brave enough to explore the boundaries of magical possibility, yet concrete information remains elusive, protected by traditions of secrecy that may extend back to Gamp himself. The very fact that these exceptions are not widely taught suggests that knowledge of them might be dangerous, either because understanding the limitations could lead to attempts to circumvent them with catastrophic consequences, or because the exceptions themselves involve magical principles too dangerous for general knowledge. The question of whether Gamp's law represents a complete catalogue of magical limitations or merely the most significant examples of a much larger set of restrictions touches upon fundamental issues in magical theory that have never been satisfactorily resolved. The neat categorization of exactly 5 exceptions seems almost too convenient, suggesting either remarkable insight on Gamp's part or the possibility that additional limitations exist but have been classified separately or remain undiscovered entirely. The systematic nature of magical education would benefit enormously from comprehensive understanding of all magical limitations, yet such knowledge appears to be deliberately restricted to the smallest possible number of individuals. The broader question of whether magic operates according to conservation principles similar to those governing physical energy represents one of the most profound theoretical challenges in understanding magical mechanics. Muggle physics has established that energy cannot be created or destroyed, but only transformed from one form to another. Yet magical phenomena appear to violate this principle routinely, creating light, heat, motion, and other forms of energy, seemingly from nothing more than focused will and properly articulated incantation. The relationship between magical energy and physical energy remains one of the great unsolved problems in magical theory, with implications that extend throughout every branch of magical practice. The effortless nature of most magical casting presents additional puzzles about the source and limitations of magical power, as even first-year students can perform feats that would require enormous physical energy if accomplished through mundane means. The levitation of heavy objects through Wingardium Leviosa, for example, appears to require no more effort from the caster, regardless of whether they are lifting feathers or massive stone blocks, suggesting that the magical energy involved operates according to principles entirely divorced from the physical properties of the objects being manipulated. This disconnect between magical effort and physical effect implies either that magical power draws upon energy sources that exist outside normal physical reality, or that consciousness itself possesses capabilities that transcend ordinary limitations. The progression from simple levitation exercises with feathers to the complex manipulation of heavy objects reveals important insights about the relationship between magical ability and mental concentration rather than physical strength, or endurance. The feather exercises that begin magical education appear to serve not as training in the application of magical force, but rather as practice in the focused attention and precise visualization that magical casting requires. Once students master the mental discipline necessary for controlled magical manipulation, the physical characteristics of their targets become largely irrelevant, suggesting that magical limitations are primarily psychological rather than energetic. The extraordinary magical feats accomplished by powerful wizards throughout history provide additional evidence that individual magical capacity may be virtually unlimited when channeled through sufficient knowledge and mental discipline. Dumbledore's casual manipulation of massive objects, his ability to apparate across great distances while carrying passengers, and his effortless casting of spells that would challenge entire groups of ordinary wizards all suggest that magical power scales with understanding and mental capacity rather than being subject to fixed limitations. This scaling implies that the apparent boundaries of magical ability may represent temporary limitations imposed by insufficient knowledge or inadequate mental development, rather than fundamental constraints inherent in magical reality itself. The question of whether magical exhaustion represents genuine depletion of some finite magical resource or simply the fatigue that results from intense mental concentration remains hotly debated among magical theorists who study the mechanics of spellcasting and magical endurance. Some evidence suggests that wizards can indeed exhaust their magical reserves through prolonged or intensive spellcasting, requiring rest and recovery before their full abilities return. However, other observations indicate that apparent magical fatigue may result primarily from the mental strain of maintaining the concentration and visualization that effective magic requires, rather than from depletion of any finite magical energy source. The relationship between magical ability and physical health provides additional clues about the nature of magical power and its limitations, as illness, injury, and emotional distress all appear to affect magical performance in ways that suggest deep connections between magical ability and overall vitality. Wizards recovering from serious injuries often experience corresponding reductions in their magical capabilities, while emotional trauma can cause magical abilities to become unreliable or even dangerous to exercise. These connections imply that magical power may be intimately linked to life force itself, drawing upon the same fundamental energy that sustains consciousness and physical vitality. The phenomenon of magical maturation, where young wizards gradually develop greater magical ability as they age and gain experience, suggests that magical power is not fixed at birth, but rather grows and develops throughout an individual's lifetime, in response to practice, education, and psychological development. This developmental pattern implies that magical ability represents not a simple genetic inheritance, but rather a complex capability that emerges through the interaction of innate potential with environmental factors and deliberate cultivation. The implications for magical education are profound, suggesting that proper training and development could potentially expand magical capabilities far beyond levels that might seem possible based on initial demonstrations of ability. The question of whether magical ability possesses theoretical upper limits or could potentially be developed indefinitely through proper training and understanding touches upon some of the deepest mysteries in magical theory. Historical accounts of legendary wizards suggest that individual magical power can reach levels that seem almost godlike by ordinary standards. Yet even the most powerful historical figures appear to have remained subject to certain fundamental limitations and constraints. The absence of any wizards who achieve truly unlimited magical ability suggests either that such limits exist and are absolute, or that the knowledge and discipline required to transcend them are so extraordinary that they remain beyond the reach of even the most gifted and dedicated practitioners. The role of magical devices and artifacts in extending or amplifying individual magical ability provides insights into the relationship between natural magical power and technological enhancement, though the principles underlying such amplification remain poorly understood. Powerful magical artifacts appear to operate by focusing, concentrating, or redirecting magical energy rather than creating new power from nothing, suggesting that they work within the same fundamental constraints that govern natural magical ability. However, the most legendary artifacts seem to enable feats that would be impossible through natural ability alone, implying that sufficiently advanced magical technology might be capable of transcending at least some of the limitations that constrain ordinary magical practice. The mystery of wandless magic and its relationship to wand-assisted casting reveals important insights about the nature of magical channeling and the role of external tools in focusing magical power. Some wizards demonstrate ability to perform magic without wands, though such casting is generally less precise and powerful than wand-assisted magic, suggesting that magical implements serve primarily to focus and direct magical energy rather than to generate it. The superior performance achieved through wand use implies that magical power benefits from external channeling and amplification, though the mechanisms underlying such enhancement remain largely theoretical. The question of whether magical ability operates according to principles analogous to those governing other forms of specialized human capability touches upon fundamental questions about the nature of talent, training, and human potential. Like musical or athletic ability, magical power appears to involve both innate gifts and developed skills, with the most extraordinary achievements requiring exceptional natural ability enhanced through dedicated practice and proper instruction. However, the supernatural nature of magical effects suggests that magical ability may operate according to principles that transcend ordinary human limitations entirely, accessing capabilities that exist beyond the normal boundaries of human potential. The theoretical possibility that magical limitations might be overcome through sufficiently advanced understanding and technique represents one of the most intriguing areas of speculation in magical theory, though such research would necessarily involve risks that few scholars are willing to accept. If Gamp's law and similar restrictions represent not absolute barriers but merely the current limits of magical knowledge and technique, then systematic research into the nature of these limitations might eventually yield methods for transcending them. However, the dangers inherent in such research, combined with the traditional secrecy surrounding advanced magical theory, make it unlikely that such investigations will be undertaken openly or with official sanction. The relationship between individual magical ability and collective magical working opens additional questions about the scalability of magical power and the potential for cooperation to transcend individual limitations. Historical accounts describe rituals and workings that required multiple wizards working in coordination to achieve effects that would be impossible for any individual practitioner, suggesting that magical power can be combined and focused through proper coordination and shared intention. The principles governing such collective magic remain poorly understood, though they may provide insights into the fundamental nature of magical energy and its relationship to consciousness and will. The question of whether magical ability represents a finite resource that could theoretically be exhausted through overuse or depletion touches upon environmental concerns about the sustainability of magical practice on a global scale. If magical power draws upon some finite source of energy that exists within the natural world, then the increasing population of magical practitioners and the growing sophistication of magical technology might eventually strain or exhaust the resources upon which all magic depends. However, the apparent effortlessness of most magical practice suggests that magical energy may be effectively unlimited, drawing upon sources that exist beyond normal physical reality and therefore beyond the possibility of depletion through any conceivable level of use. The mystery of why certain magical effects appear to be impossible or extremely difficult to achieve, even for the most skilled practitioners, provides additional insights into the nature of magical limitations and the principles that govern magical possibility. Some effects that seem theoretically straightforward prove to be extraordinarily challenging in practice, while others that appear impossibly complex can be accomplished with relative ease by those who understand the proper techniques. These patterns suggest that magical difficulty may be determined by factors that have little relationship to apparent complexity, or the scale of the desired effects, operating instead according to principles that reflect the fundamental structure of magical reality itself. The philosophical implications of magical limitations extend far beyond practical questions about what can or cannot be accomplished through magical means, touching upon fundamental issues about the nature of reality, possibility, and human agency within a universe where consciousness appears capable of directly manipulating physical phenomena. The existence of any limitations on magical ability suggests that even in a world where thought can be translated directly into physical effect, certain boundaries remain inviolate. Certain principles operate beyond the reach of will and intention. These limitations may represent not arbitrary restrictions, but rather fundamental characteristics of reality that give meaning to choice and consequence by ensuring that not every possibility can be actualized simultaneously. As the gentle rhythms of night deepen around you, and consciousness prepares for its own mysterious transformations through sleep and dream, let the paradox of magical limitations remind you that boundaries, far from restricting possibility, often create the very conditions that make possibility meaningful. The most profound magic may lie not in transcending every limitation, but in understanding how constraints and freedoms dance together to create the intricate patterns of experience that make existence itself the most magical phenomenon of all. In the mists of prehistory, when the world was young and magic flowed through reality like rivers of starlight carving channels through the bedrock of existence itself, there arose questions that have haunted magical consciousness since the first spark of awareness recognized its own power to reshape the fundamental forces of creation. The origins of magical ability represent perhaps the most profound mystery in all of wizarding knowledge, touching upon questions that bridge the gap between magical theory and the deepest philosophical inquiries about consciousness, evolution, and the very nature of what it means to be human in a universe where thought can be transmuted directly into physical reality. Tonight, as you rest in the embrace of inherited gifts whose origins stretch back through countless generations, we shall explore the enigma of how magical consciousness first emerged from the ordinary stream of human development, transforming some individuals into bridges between the mundane and the miraculous. The archaeological record provides tantalizing glimpses of humanity's earliest encounters with magical forces, though the evidence remains fragmentary and open to multiple interpretations that reflect as much about the biases of modern researchers as they do about the actual historical development of magical ability. Ancient cave paintings discovered in remote locations throughout Europe and beyond display characteristics that suggest they were created through magical rather than purely physical means, their pigments containing trace elements that exist nowhere in the natural world, and their forms displaying mathematical precision that would have been impossible to achieve through conventional artistic techniques. These works speak of minds that understood reality in ways fundamentally different from ordinary human consciousness, perceiving patterns and possibilities that remained invisible to their non-magical contemporaries. Stone circles and similar megalithic structures scattered across the magical world provide additional evidence of ancient civilizations that possessed sophisticated understanding of magical forces, though the specific nature of their abilities and the methods by which they developed such capabilities remain subjects of intense scholarly debate. The astronomical alignments built into these structures suggest not merely observational astronomy, but practical knowledge of how celestial forces interact with terrestrial magical fields to create opportunities for enhanced spellcasting and ritual working. Such understanding implies systematic study and experimentation conducted over generations by individuals whose magical abilities must have been both powerful and precisely controlled. The question of whether magical ability represents a genetic mutation that emerged through natural evolutionary processes or some other form of transformation entirely touches upon fundamental issues in both magical theory and biological science that remain unresolved. Despite centuries of careful research, the inheritance patterns observed in magical families suggest that magical ability does indeed follow genetic principles to some extent, with magical parents being far more likely to produce magical children than purely Muggle bloodlines. However, the existence of Muggle-born witches and wizards like Hermione Granger demonstrates that magical ability can emerge spontaneously in bloodlines with no known magical heritage, suggesting that the genetic components of magic may be more complex and widely distributed than simple inheritance models would predict. The phenomenon of squibs, individuals born to magical parents but lacking magical abilities themselves, provides additional complexity to any purely genetic explanation of magical inheritance. If magical ability were determined by simple, dominant, or recessive genetic factors, the statistical distribution of magical and non-magical children within established magical families should follow predictable patterns that do not match the observed data. The apparently random nature of squib birth suggests that magical ability may depend upon genetic combinations so complex that they approach randomness, or alternatively, that non-genetic factors play crucial roles in determining whether inherited magical potential manifests as actual ability. The alternative theory that magic represents a form of spiritual or consciousness-based phenomenon that selects individuals according to criteria that have nothing to do with biological inheritance offers elegant explanations for many of the anomalies that plague genetic models of magical ability. Under this interpretation, magical consciousness would represent a form of enhanced awareness that emerges when individual minds achieve sufficient development or sensitivity to perceive and interact with magical forces that surround all human beings, but remain invisible to ordinary perception. Such awakening might be influenced by genetic predisposition, but would not be determined by it, allowing for magical ability to emerge in any family line, while explaining why it tends to cluster in certain bloodlines that possess traditions and environments conducive to such development. The deep historical connection between magical families and specific locations, objects, and traditional practices suggests that magical ability may be as much cultural as biological, passed down through teaching, environment, and shared understanding rather than purely through genetic inheritance. The great magical families often trace their powers to particular geographical regions where magical forces are especially strong, suggesting that prolonged exposure to enhanced magical fields may play crucial roles in developing and maintaining magical abilities across generations. The loss of magical ability that sometimes occurs when magical families abandon their ancestral homes and traditions supports this environmental interpretation of magical development. The mysterious case of Tom Riddle, born to a magical mother and Muggle father yet possessing extraordinary magical abilities from earliest childhood, demonstrates that magical power can emerge from mixed heritage in ways that exceed what either parent line might have suggested. His precocious development of magical control before receiving any formal training implies that some individuals possess innate connections to magical forces that operate independently of education or environmental factors. Such cases suggest that magical ability may represent the intersection of multiple factors, including genetics, environment, and perhaps spiritual or consciousness-based elements that remain poorly understood. The question of whether the first magical humans developed their abilities through interaction with external magical forces, or discovered capabilities that were always present within human consciousness, but previously dormant, touches upon fundamental questions about the relationship between consciousness and reality itself. Ancient magical texts hint at contact with entities or forces that existed before human civilization, suggesting that magical abilities may have been gifts or teachings received from sources that operated according to principles entirely different from human understanding. These accounts may be mythological rather than historical, but they reflect persistent traditions that magic represents knowledge or ability that originated outside ordinary human development. The gradual decline in magical ability that appears to have occurred throughout recorded history, with ancient wizards seemingly capable of feats that modern practitioners can barely comprehend, suggests either that magical knowledge has been lost over time, or that the fundamental sources of magical power have somehow diminished. Archaeological evidence supports both interpretations, revealing technological and architectural achievements that would challenge the greatest magical minds of the contemporary era, while also indicating environmental changes that may have reduced the natural magical fields upon which ancient practitioners depended. The relationship between these historical trends and the origins of magical ability remains unclear, though it implies that magical consciousness may be more fragile and environmentally dependent than commonly supposed. The diversity of magical abilities and approaches found in different cultural traditions around the world provides additional insights into the nature of magical consciousness and its development across different human populations. African magical traditions emphasize harmony between practitioner and natural forces. Asian approaches focus on balance and energy manipulation, while European methods tend toward formal structure and systematic classification. These differences may reflect adaptation to different magical environments, varying cultural values that shape how magical ability is understood and developed, or fundamental variations in how magical consciousness manifests across different human genetic and cultural backgrounds. The relationship between magical ability and other forms of enhanced human capability, such as artistic genius, exceptional intelligence, or extraordinary physical abilities, remains largely unexplored, though certain patterns suggest possible connections that could illuminate the origins of all exceptional human capabilities. Many of the greatest wizards throughout history have also demonstrated remarkable achievements in non-magical fields, suggesting that magical ability may represent one manifestation of more general enhancement in human consciousness and capability. The mechanisms underlying such enhancement, whether they involve genetic factors, environmental influences, or spiritual development, may be similar across different domains of human excellence. The question of whether magical ability continues to evolve and develop in response to changing environmental conditions and cultural pressures touches upon issues that have profound implications for the future of magical civilization. The emergence of new forms of magical expression and the gradual development of previously unknown magical capabilities in certain individuals suggests that magical consciousness may be more dynamic and responsive than traditional theories. Acknowledge, such evolution might represent adaptation to changing magical environments, responses to new challenges and opportunities, or natural progression toward more sophisticated forms of magical awareness. The mysterious connection between magical ability and emotional development, particularly the role that love, sacrifice, and other profound emotional experiences play in enhancing or unlocking magical capabilities, suggests that magical consciousness may be intimately linked to psychological and spiritual maturity, rather than being primarily a matter of technical knowledge or genetic inheritance. The protective magic that saved Harry Potter, born from his mother's loving sacrifice, represents magical effects that operate according to principles that transcend ordinary spellcasting and appear to draw upon emotional and spiritual resources that exist beyond normal magical theory. The phenomenon of magical awakening, where individuals who showed no previous signs of magical ability suddenly develop powerful capabilities in response to extreme circumstances or profound emotional experiences, provides additional evidence that magical consciousness may be more widely distributed among human populations than commonly supposed. Such awakenings suggest that magical potential may exist in dormant form within many individuals who never develop it under ordinary circumstances, requiring specific triggers or environmental conditions to manifest as actual magical ability. The relationship between magical ability and mental health, creativity, and other aspects of psychological functioning offers insights into the nature of magical consciousness and its integration with ordinary human awareness. Many powerful wizards throughout history have displayed characteristics that would be considered eccentric or even pathological by conventional standards, yet their magical abilities often appear to be enhanced rather than hindered by such differences. This pattern suggests that magical consciousness may require or benefit from forms of mental functioning that diverge from normal patterns, possibly explaining why magical ability often emerges in individuals who perceive reality differently from their non-magical contemporaries. The theoretical possibility that magical ability represents an evolutionary development that points toward future forms of human consciousness opens speculative possibilities that extend far beyond current understanding of human potential and development. If magical awareness represents a more advanced form of consciousness that allows direct interaction with fundamental forces of reality, then its emergence in certain individuals might indicate the direction of human evolution and the eventual capabilities that could become available to all humanity given sufficient time and proper development. Such evolution would represent not merely the acquisition of new abilities, but fundamental transformation in what it means to be human. The question of whether magical consciousness can be artificially induced or enhanced through technological or pharmaceutical intervention touches upon ethical issues that the magical world has barely begun to address, though such possibilities raise profound questions about equality, authenticity, and the nature of human identity. If magical ability could be granted to non-magical individuals through external means, the social and philosophical implications would be enormous, potentially eliminating the fundamental distinction between magical and muggle populations, while raising questions about whether artificially induced abilities would possess the same moral and spiritual dimensions as naturally developed magical consciousness. The mystery of why magical ability manifests so differently across individuals, from the barely detectable talents of marginal wizards to the extraordinary capabilities of figures like Dumbledore and Voldemort, suggests that magical consciousness exists along a continuum rather than being a simple binary characteristic. The factors that determine where individual wizards fall along this continuum remain poorly understood, though they appear to involve complex interactions between genetic potential, environmental influences, educational opportunities, and psychological factors that operate differently for each individual. The deep connection between magical ability and personal identity, with magical individuals often defining themselves primarily in terms of their magical capabilities and relationships to magical communities, raises questions about whether magical consciousness represents simply an additional human ability or a fundamentally different form of awareness that creates distinct categories of human being. The social segregation that has historically existed between magical and non-magical populations may reflect recognition of differences that go far deeper than simple technical capabilities, touching upon fundamental variations in how consciousness itself operates and develops. The relationship between magical ability and spiritual or religious experience remains largely unexplored in official magical education. Though historical accounts suggest that many powerful wizards have understood their abilities in explicitly spiritual terms, that connect magical practice to broader questions about the nature of existence and human purpose. Such interpretations might provide insights into the ultimate origins and meaning of magical consciousness, though they would require forms of investigation that bridge magical theory with philosophical and theological inquiry in ways that contemporary magical scholarship typically avoids. The question of whether magical ability represents humanity's natural inheritance, temporarily suppressed by historical circumstances, or an anomalous development that affects only a small percentage of the human population, touches upon fundamental questions about human nature and potential that have implications extending far beyond the magical world. If magical consciousness represents capabilities that are naturally present within all humans but have been suppressed or forgotten, then the ultimate goal of magical civilization might be the awakening of such abilities throughout the entire human population, rather than maintaining the current divisions between magical and non-magical communities. As the deepest hours of night embrace you, and consciousness prepares for its own daily transformation through sleep and dream, let the mystery of magical origins remind you that the greatest magic may lie not in spectacular displays of power, but in the simple miracle of awareness itself. The extraordinary fact that consciousness exists at all in a universe vast enough to contain both mundane reality and magical possibility rests now in the wonder of inherited gifts whose origins stretch back through time immemorial, finding peace in questions that connect you to the deepest mysteries of existence itself. In the shadowed laboratories of magical innovation, where brilliant minds dare to push beyond the boundaries of established knowledge, into realms where new possibilities are born from equal measures of inspiration and peril, there exists perhaps the most mysterious and dangerous of all magical pursuits: the creation of entirely new spells and incantations. The art of spellcrafting represents the intersection of magical theory with pure creative genius, requiring not only profound understanding of magical principles, but also the courage to venture into uncharted territories where a single miscalculation might result in consequences ranging from embarrassing failure to catastrophic destruction. Tonight, as you rest safely within the protective embrace of spells created by generations of innovative minds, we shall explore the enigmatic process by which magical knowledge expands, how new possibilities are discovered or perhaps invented, and the terrible prices that innovation sometimes demands from those brave enough to attempt it. The historical record of spell creation reveals a pattern of extraordinary individual achievement, punctuated by tragic failures that serve as sobering reminders of the dangers inherent in magical experimentation. Throughout the centuries, a handful of exceptional wizards have managed to expand the boundaries of magical possibility through innovations that have enriched the entire magical world. Yet for every success, dozens of promising researchers have paid the ultimate price for their ambition. The process appears to demand not only intellectual brilliance and magical power, but also a willingness to risk everything in pursuit of knowledge that may prove either revolutionary or lethal. The theoretical foundations underlying spell creation remain among the most closely guarded secrets in magical education, taught only to the most advanced students, and even then, in highly controlled environments designed to minimize the catastrophic risks that unguided experimentation can unleash. The basic principles appear deceptively simple, involving the careful integration of specific incantations with precisely choreographed wand movements while maintaining focused intent on the desired magical effect. However, the practical application of these principles requires intuitive understanding of magical forces that cannot be adequately conveyed through purely academic instruction, demanding instead the kind of deep magical sensitivity that emerges only through years of intensive practice and study. The tragic fate of Pandora Lovegood provides perhaps the most poignant illustration of the dangers that await even experienced magical researchers who venture too far into uncharted theoretical territory. Her death during a spell creation experiment left profound scars not only on her young daughter Luna, but also on the entire magical research community, serving as a stark reminder that innovation in magic carries risks that extend far beyond the immediate experimenter to encompass family members and colleagues who may be affected by unforeseen consequences. The specific nature of her experimental work remains classified, though the circumstances of her death suggest that she was exploring magical principles that proved far more dangerous than her considerable expertise had led her to anticipate. The question of whether spell creation represents discovery of magical effects that already exist in potential form, or actual invention of entirely new magical possibilities, touches upon fundamental questions about the nature of magic itself and its relationship to human consciousness and will. Some magical theorists argue that all possible spells exist in eternal form within the underlying structure of magical reality, waiting to be discovered by researchers with sufficient knowledge and insight to perceive them. This view suggests that spell creators function more like explorers mapping unknown territory than inventors creating something genuinely new, uncovering magical effects that have always been possible but simply remained unknown to human understanding. The alternative interpretation holds that spell creation represents genuine innovation, with skilled wizards actually expanding the realm of magical possibility through creative acts that bring entirely new forms of magic into existence. Under this theory, the magical universe possesses inherent flexibility that allows conscious, intent, and focused will to create new magical laws and effects that did not previously exist even in potential form. Such creation would represent the ultimate expression of magical power, transforming the fundamental nature of reality itself through acts of conscious innovation that transcend even the most advanced forms of conventional spellcasting. The role of inspiration and intuitive insight in successful spell creation suggests that the process involves more than systematic application of known magical principles, requiring instead creative leaps that bridge the gap between theoretical knowledge and practical innovation. Many of the most significant advances in magical knowledge have reportedly emerged through sudden moments of inspiration that provided their creators with complete understanding of new magical effects, including the specific incantations and wand movements required to achieve them. These moments of insight appear to operate according to principles that have more in common with artistic creativity than with systematic research, suggesting that spell creation may require integration of logical analysis with intuitive awareness that operates below the threshold of conscious thought. The mysterious relationship between the emotional and psychological state of spell creators and their success in developing new magical effects indicates that innovation in magic may be intimately connected to the deepest levels of human point, consciousness, and personal development. Historical accounts suggest that many breakthrough spells were created during periods of intense emotional experience, whether driven by love, anger, grief, or other powerful feelings that temporarily dissolved the normal boundaries between conscious intent and magical reality. This connection implies that spell creation may require not just technical knowledge, but also emotional authenticity and psychological integration that allows the creator to access and channel forces that exist beyond ordinary magical practice. The specific case of Severus Snape's creation of Sectum Sempra during his student years at Hogwarts demonstrates both the precocious genius that exceptional individuals can bring to spell creation and the terrible consequences that can result when powerful new magic is developed without adequate consideration of its potential for harm. His invention of a spell capable of causing severe magical wounds that resist normal healing techniques reveals sophisticated understanding of curse mechanics and magical anatomy that exceeded anything taught in standard educational curricula. The fact that he accomplished this innovation while still a teenager suggests that spell creation may be less dependent on years of experience than on natural talent combined with intense focus and perhaps emotional motivation that transcends normal academic interest. The broader implications of Snape's achievement raise disturbing questions about the ease with which determined students might develop dangerous new magical effects outside the oversight of qualified instructors, potentially creating spells whose consequences extend far beyond their original intentions or understanding. The casual manner in which Harry Potter attempted to use Sectum Sempra against Draco Malfoy, without any knowledge of its actual effects, illustrates how dangerous innovations can spread through informal channels and be misused by individuals who lack both the knowledge to employ them safely and the wisdom to recognize their destructive potential. The question of whether successful spell creation requires specific magical or psychological characteristics that are present in only a small percentage of the wizarding population touches upon fundamental issues about the nature of magical innovation and the factors that enable certain individuals to expand the boundaries of magical knowledge. The relative rarity of significant spell innovations throughout magical history suggests either that the necessary capabilities are extremely uncommon, or that the risks involved discourage all but the most dedicated and courageous researchers from attempting such work. The concentration of major innovations among a small number of historically significant figures implies that spell creation may require unique combinations of magical ability, intellectual brilliance, and psychological characteristics that emerge only occasionally in the general population. The role of systematic research and experimental methodology in spell creation remains poorly understood, though the fragmentary accounts that exist suggest that successful innovation requires careful balance between rigorous theoretical analysis and willingness to venture beyond established knowledge into realms where conventional wisdom provides no guidance. The most successful spell creators appear to have combined encyclopedic knowledge of existing magical theory with intuitive leaps that allowed them to perceive connections and possibilities that escaped more conventional researchers. This integration of systematic knowledge with creative insight may represent the essential characteristic that distinguishes true innovators from scholars who excel at applying existing knowledge but cannot expand its boundaries. The mysterious process by which new incantations are selected or discovered represents one of the most puzzling aspects of spell creation, as the relationship between specific words and their magical effects appears to operate according to principles that remain largely theoretical rather than practical. Some researchers suggest that effective incantations tap into linguistic patterns that exist at deeper levels than ordinary language, possibly connecting to mathematical or musical principles that resonate with the fundamental structures of magical reality. The cross-cultural consistency of certain magical terms and the apparent effectiveness of incantations derived from ancient languages support theories that magical language operates according to universal principles rather than arbitrary associations between words and effects. The question of whether the physical components of spellcasting, particularly wand movements and gestures, represent essential elements of the magical effect, or merely focusing aids that help practitioners channel their intent more precisely, remains hotly debated among magical theorists who study the mechanics of spell creation. Some evidence suggests that specific physical movements are indeed necessary for certain magical effects, implying that magic operates through precise coordination between mental intent, verbal incantation, and physical gesture. However, the existence of wandless magic and the ability of some practitioners to achieve magical effects through pure mental focus suggests that physical components may be more flexible than traditional instruction acknowledges. The development of new magical devices and artifacts that enhance or focus spell creation abilities represents an area of research that could potentially revolutionize the field of magical innovation, though such work remains highly experimental and fraught with dangers that may exceed even those associated with conventional spell creation. Theoretical devices that could amplify magical sensitivity, enhance creative insight, or provide protection against experimental failures might enable researchers to explore magical territories that are currently too dangerous to investigate. However, the creation of such devices would itself require breakthrough advances in magical theory that might be as challenging and risky as the spell creation research they are intended to support. The relationship between spell creation and other forms of magical research, including potion brewing, magical creature studies, and theoretical analysis of magical principles, suggests that innovation in magic may benefit from interdisciplinary approaches that integrate insights from multiple areas of magical knowledge. Many of the most significant advances in spell creation have emerged from researchers whose interests span several fields of magical study, allowing them to perceive connections and possibilities that specialists in single areas might miss. This pattern implies that the future of magical innovation may depend upon educational approaches that encourage broad knowledge and synthetic thinking rather than narrow specialization. The question of whether spell creation represents an evolutionary development in magical consciousness that will eventually become more common and accessible touches upon speculative possibilities about the future development of magical ability and its role in human evolution. If the capacity for magical innovation represents an advanced form of magical consciousness that is gradually becoming more widespread, then future generations might see spell creation transition from rare individual achievement to more common capability available to significant portions of the magical population. Such development would accelerate the expansion of magical knowledge exponentially, though it would also multiply the risks associated with experimental magic and require new approaches to education and regulation. The ethical implications of spell creation, particularly the responsibility that innovators bear for the eventual uses and consequences of their magical discoveries, remain largely unaddressed by formal magical education or professional guidelines, though the potential for misuse of powerful new spells creates moral dilemmas that extend throughout magical society. The development of spells intended for beneficial purposes, but possessing clear potential for harmful application, creates particular challenges for researchers who must balance the desire to advance magical knowledge against the risk that their innovations might be used to cause suffering or destruction. The absence of clear ethical frameworks for evaluating such trade-offs leaves individual researchers to make decisions that may affect the entire magical world based on personal moral judgments that may be inadequate for such profound responsibilities. The mystery of why certain magical effects appear to be impossible to achieve through spell creation, despite seeming theoretically straightforward and practically useful, provides insights into the fundamental limitations that constrain magical innovation and the boundaries beyond which even the most gifted researchers cannot venture. The apparent impossibility of creating spells that can resurrect the dead, grant genuine immortality, or alter the past suggests that certain magical effects may be prohibited not by technical limitations, but by fundamental laws that operate at levels deeper than ordinary magical theory acknowledges. Understanding these limitations might provide crucial insights into the nature of magic itself and the principles that govern its operation. The role of collaborative research in spell creation remains largely unexplored, though theoretical considerations suggest that cooperative efforts might overcome some of the limitations that constrain individual researchers while creating new forms of risk that arise from the interaction of multiple magical consciousnesses focused on innovative work. The challenges of coordinating multiple researchers working on dangerous experimental magic might be offset by the enhanced capabilities that could emerge from properly integrated collaborative efforts. However, the historical predominance of individual achievement in spell creation suggests that innovation in magic may require forms of creative insight that are inherently personal and difficult to achieve through group efforts. The relationship between spell creation and the natural development of magical ability throughout an individual's lifetime raises questions about optimal timing and preparation for innovative research, as well as the personal costs that such work may exact from those who pursue it seriously. The intense focus and risk acceptance that spell creation requires may be incompatible with normal life patterns and relationships, potentially explaining why many of the most significant magical innovators have been isolated figures whose personal lives were subordinated to their research interests. The psychological and social costs of such dedication raise questions about whether the advancement of magical knowledge justifies the personal sacrifices it demands from those capable of contributing to it. As the quiet hours deepen around you and the familiar spells that protect your rest continue their eternal vigil, let the mystery of magical innovation remind you that creativity itself may be the deepest magic of all, the force that transforms possibility into reality through courage, dedication, and the willingness to venture beyond the safety of known territories. The wizards who expanded our understanding of magical possibility paid prices that we can barely imagine. Yet their gifts continue to enrich every life touched by magic, proving that some forms of creation transcend even the death of their creators to become eternal additions to the sum of magical knowledge and human possibility. In the darkest corners of magical knowledge, where the most terrible powers known to wizardkind cast their malevolent shadows across the landscape of human possibility, there exist three curses so fundamentally destructive to the fabric of civilized existence that their very names are spoken only in whispers by those who dare acknowledge their reality. The unforgivable curses stand as monuments to the absolute depths to which magical power can sink when divorced from moral constraint, representing not merely dangerous spells but violations of the essential principles that make magical society possible. Tonight, as you rest, protected by layers of benevolent magic woven by those who chose light over darkness, we shall explore the terrible mystery of why these particular manifestations of evil cannot be stopped by conventional magical defenses, and what their existence reveals about the fundamental nature of magical power itself. The theoretical impossibility of blocking the unforgivable curses through normal defensive magic has puzzled magical theorists for centuries, creating one of the most profound enigmas in the study of magical combat and protection. Unlike ordinary hexes and curses, which can typically be deflected through shield charms or countered through appropriate magical techniques, the three unforgivable curses appear to operate according to principles that transcend conventional magical theory. This absolute penetration of normal defenses suggests that these curses tap into magical forces that exist at deeper levels of reality than those accessed by standard spellcasting, drawing their power from sources that conventional protective magic cannot reach or influence. The killing curse, Avada Kedavra, represents perhaps the most fundamentally disturbing manifestation of this principle, as it appears to sever the connection between soul and body through mechanisms that operate entirely outside normal magical healing or protection. The green light that marks its passage carries with it not merely destructive force, but something approaching anti-life itself, a magical effect that negates the fundamental vitality that sustains consciousness within physical form. The absolute nature of this negation explains why no conventional magical defense can provide protection, as the curse operates by attacking the essential life force, rather than merely causing physical damage that might be prevented or healed through normal means. The mystery of what psychological and spiritual conditions must be present within the caster for the killing curse to function effectively reveals disturbing insights into the relationship between magical power and moral character. The curse cannot be cast successfully by wizards who retain normal human empathy and connection to the value of life, requiring instead a fundamental corruption of the caster's essential nature that allows them to genuinely desire the complete destruction of another conscious being. This requirement suggests that the most terrible magical effects may be accessible only to those who have already surrendered their basic humanity, creating a form of natural protection that prevents ordinary wizards from accidentally or impulsively employing such devastating power. The Cruciatus Curse presents its own unique form of horror, inflicting pain so complete and overwhelming that it can shatter the strongest minds and reduce the most courageous individuals to broken shells of their former selves. The curse appears to attack not merely the nervous system but consciousness itself, creating experiences of suffering that transcend physical sensation to encompass spiritual and psychological torment that can permanently alter the victim's fundamental relationship to existence. The fact that such effects cannot be prevented through normal protective magic suggests that the curse operates by directly manipulating the victim's conscious experience, rather than simply causing physical damage that might be blocked or mitigated. The requirement that effective casting of the Cruciatus Curse demands genuine sadistic pleasure from the infliction of suffering reveals additional disturbing insights into how the most evil magical effects draw their power from the moral corruption of their users. Harry Potter's failed attempts to use the curse against Bellatrix, Lestrange, and Snape demonstrate that righteous anger or desire for justice, however intense, cannot provide the psychological foundation necessary for successful casting. Only genuine enjoyment of another being's agony appears sufficient to channel the magical forces that make the curse effective, creating another form of natural barrier that prevents its use by wizards who retain basic moral sensitivity. The Imperious Curse, perhaps the most insidious of the three unforgivable curses, operates by enslaving the victim's will while leaving their consciousness intact to observe their own helplessness, creating a form of psychological violation that may be more devastating than physical destruction or torture. The curse appears to function by severing the normal connection between conscious decision-making and physical action, allowing the caster to control the victim's behavior while forcing them to remain aware of their complete powerlessness. This combination of awareness and helplessness creates a unique form of torment that attacks the very foundation of individual identity and autonomous existence. The mystery of why some individuals prove naturally resistant to the Imperious Curse while others succumb immediately touches upon fundamental questions about the nature of consciousness, will, and individual identity that extend far beyond magical theory into philosophical and psychological realms that remain poorly understood. Harry Potter's ability to resist the curse appears to stem from his unusually strong sense of individual identity and moral conviction, qualities that seem to provide natural protection against magical attempts to override his autonomous decision-making. This resistance suggests that magical defenses against certain forms of attack may depend more upon psychological and spiritual strength than upon technical magical knowledge or protective spells. The question of whether the unforgivable curses represent the ultimate expression of evil magical power or merely the most notorious examples of a larger category of absolutely penetrating magical effects touches upon theoretical issues that have profound implications for understanding the fundamental nature of magical combat and protection. Some evidence suggests that other spells may possess similar abilities to bypass conventional magical defenses when cast with sufficient power and malevolent intent, though the specific combination of devastating effect and complete unblockability that characterizes the three unforgivable curses appears to be genuinely unique in the catalogue of known magical effects. The historical development of magical law that classified these three curses as unforgivable, punishable by life imprisonment in Azkaban without possibility of parole or appeal, reflects recognition that certain forms of magical power are so fundamentally incompatible with civilized society that their use can never be justified under any circumstances. This absolute prohibition stands in stark contrast to the more nuanced approach taken toward other dangerous magical effects, suggesting that the lawmakers who established these penalties understood something essential about the nature of these curses that distinguishes them from all other forms of magical violence or coercion. The theoretical possibility that the unforgivable curses might be blockable by wizards who possess sufficient understanding of their underlying mechanisms raises disturbing questions about what such understanding might require and whether the knowledge necessary to develop effective defenses might be as corrupting as the curses themselves. If blocking these curses requires intimate comprehension of the psychological and spiritual conditions that make them effective, then potential defenders might need to explore forms of evil that could permanently damage their own moral nature. This creates a paradox where the knowledge required to protect against ultimate evil might itself represent a form of corruption that undermines the very values that make such protection worthwhile. The relationship between the unforgivable curses and other forms of absolute magical effects, including certain ancient rituals and legendary artifacts, suggests that the mechanisms underlying their unblockable nature may represent manifestations of deeper magical principles that operate at the foundational levels of reality itself. These principles appear to involve direct manipulation of the essential forces that govern life, consciousness, and free will, creating effects that transcend the normal boundaries between magical technique and fundamental natural law. Understanding these principles might provide insights into the deepest mysteries of magical theory, though such knowledge would necessarily involve exploration of concepts that challenge basic assumptions about the nature of existence and moral reality. The question of whether physical objects or environmental barriers can provide protection against the unforgivable curses where magical defenses fail offers some hope for defense against these terrible weapons, though the effectiveness of such protection appears to depend upon specific circumstances that remain poorly understood. The golden statue that saved Harry Potter from Voldemort's killing curse in the Ministry of Magic demonstrated that sufficiently substantial physical barriers can intercept and absorb the curse's energy, though whether this protection extends to other physical materials or depends upon specific magical properties of the statue itself remains unclear. The mystery of why certain individuals appear to possess natural immunity or resistance to specific unforgivable curses opens possibilities for understanding these effects that could potentially lead to more widespread protection, though the rarity of such immunity suggests that it depends upon psychological or spiritual characteristics that are extremely uncommon in the general population. Harry's survival of the killing curse as an infant involved protection created through his mother's sacrifice, a form of magic that operates according to principles that may be fundamentally different from those governing normal magical combat. The possibility that similar protections might be achievable through other means remains largely theoretical, though it provides hope that absolute vulnerability to these curses may not be inevitable. The role of magical devices and artifacts in potentially enhancing resistance to the unforgivable curses represents an area of research that remains largely unexplored due to the obvious dangers inherent in systematic study of these effects. Theoretical devices that could strengthen individual willpower, enhance natural resistance to magical coercion, or provide early warning of incoming curse attacks might offer partial solutions to the problem of defense against unblockable magic. However, the development of such devices would require extensive research into the fundamental mechanisms underlying the curses, research that would necessarily involve exposure to magical principles that could corrupt or destroy the researchers attempting such work. The psychological impact of surviving encounters with the unforgivable curses appears to create permanent changes in the victims that extend far beyond simple trauma to encompass fundamental alterations in how they perceive reality and relate to other people. The Longbottoms, driven to permanent madness by prolonged exposure to the Cruciatus curse, demonstrate the devastating long-term effects that even unsuccessful attempts to use these curses can inflict upon their targets. Harry Potter's experiences with all three curses left him with enhanced sensitivity to dark magic and deeper understanding of evil that shaped his character in ways that extended throughout his life. The question of whether exposure to the unforgivable curses can somehow enhance an individual's ability to resist them in future encounters touches upon adaptation mechanisms that might provide hope for developing improved defenses against these terrible weapons. Some evidence suggests that survival of encounters with these curses may create forms of psychological or magical resilience that provide increased protection against subsequent attacks, though such adaptation appears to come at enormous personal cost that may outweigh any defensive benefits gained. The development of training methods that could provide similar resistance without requiring actual exposure to the curses themselves remains a theoretical possibility that could revolutionize defensive magic. The relationship between the effectiveness of the unforgivable curses and the magical power of their casters raises questions about whether sufficiently powerful wizards might be able to resist even these ultimate magical attacks through sheer force of magical ability rather than specific defensive technique. Dumbledore's apparent confidence in facing Voldemort, despite the Dark Lord's mastery of all three unforgivable curses, suggests either that such resistance is possible for the most powerful wizards, or that Dumbledore possessed knowledge of defensive techniques that remain unknown to ordinary magical practitioners. The specific methods by which such ultimate resistance might be achieved remain among the deepest secrets in magical defensive theory. The mystery of whether the unforgivable curses represent natural developments in magical theory that were discovered through systematic research or artificial creations that required specific knowledge and techniques that were deliberately developed for evil purposes touches upon fundamental questions about the relationship between magical knowledge and moral responsibility. If these curses represent natural extensions of ordinary magical principles, then their discovery was perhaps inevitable as magical knowledge expanded and deepened. However, if they required deliberate development by individuals specifically seeking to create ultimate weapons, then their existence reflects conscious choices to pursue evil that might have been prevented through different approaches to magical research and education. The theoretical possibility that defensive techniques equivalent in power and absolute effectiveness to the unforgivable curses might be developed to protect against them raises intriguing possibilities for magical defense that could fundamentally alter the balance of power in magical combat. Such absolute defenses would necessarily operate according to the same deep principles that make the curses unblockable, requiring understanding of magical forces that transcend normal spellcasting and potentially demanding psychological and spiritual preparation that might be as challenging as learning to cast the curses themselves. The development of such defenses would represent one of the greatest achievements in magical theory, though the knowledge required might prove as dangerous as the threats it seeks to counter. The question of whether the classification of these three specific curses as unforgivable represents complete understanding of all such absolute magical effects, or merely recognition of the most obvious examples of a larger category of ultimate magical weapons, touches upon issues that have profound implications for magical law enforcement and societal protection. The possibility that other spells of equivalent destructive power and unblockable nature remain unknown to legal authorities, or are simply not widely recognized, creates disturbing scenarios where individuals might possess ultimate magical weapons without legal consequences. The systematic identification and classification of all such effects would represent a crucial advance in magical jurisprudence, though it would require research into areas of magical knowledge that few individuals possess the courage or moral fortitude to explore. As the peaceful darkness of night settles more deeply around you, and consciousness prepares for its own mysterious journey through dreams where different laws govern reality and different possibilities become manifest, let the terrible mystery of these absolute curses remind you that the greatest magical power may lie not in the ability to destroy or control, but in the wisdom to choose restraint, the courage to accept limitations, and the profound understanding that some forms of victory would cost everything that makes victory worthwhile. Rest now in the protection of those who chose to use their power in service of light, knowing that even in a world where ultimate magical weapons exist, the deepest magic remains that which creates rather than destroys, which liberates rather than enslaves, which heals rather than harms. In the shadowed corners of Dumbledore's circular office, where ancient magic hummed through instruments whose purposes had been forgotten by all but their creator, there stood perhaps the most enigmatic collection of magical devices ever assembled in a single location. These mysterious instruments, wrought from precious metals and crystalline substances that seemed to capture and reflect light in patterns that defied conventional understanding, represented centuries of magical innovation devoted to the analysis and comprehension of forces that operated beyond ordinary perception. Tonight, as you rest in the quiet certainty of the known world, we shall explore these artifacts of forgotten purpose, these testaments to magical craftsmanship that pushed the boundaries of what individual minds could create and what magical materials could be coaxed to accomplish. The delicate silver instrument that Dumbledore employed during the crisis following Arthur Weasley's attack stands as perhaps the most mysterious of these devices. Its function so specialized and its operation so particular that even detailed observation of its use provides only fragmentary insights into its true purpose. The instrument itself appeared deceptively simple, little more than an elegant silver tube topped with miniature mechanical components that suggested the precision craftsmanship of master artificers working at the very limits of their considerable abilities. Yet when activated through methods known only to Dumbledore himself, this unassuming device produced magical emanations that provided crucial insights into the deepest mysteries of soul magic and spiritual division. The rhythmic clinking sounds that emerged from the instrument's delicate mechanisms suggested internal workings of extraordinary complexity, precision-engineered components that responded to magical influences too subtle for ordinary detection, while translating those influences into observable phenomena that trained minds could interpret and analyze. The tiny puffs of pale green smoke that issued from its silver tube appeared to carry within them concentrated essence of whatever magical forces the device was designed to analyze, creating visible manifestations of invisible realities that would otherwise remain forever beyond human comprehension. The transformation of those initial puffs into a steady stream of thickening smoke that coiled and shaped itself into the form of a serpent's head revealed the instrument's capacity to provide not merely abstract analysis, but concrete symbolic representation of complex magical phenomena. The serpent imagery that emerged from Dumbledore's theoretical inquiry into Voldemort's condition provided visual confirmation of conclusions that had been reached through pure intellectual analysis, demonstrating that properly designed magical instruments could serve as extensions of human reasoning, mechanical aids that enhanced and focused cognitive processes in ways that allowed individual minds to grasp concepts that would otherwise remain beyond their reach. Dumbledore's interpretation of the serpent's division as representing the splitting of Voldemort's soul through Horcrux creation reveals the instrument's function as a form of magical modeling system, capable of taking theoretical propositions about spiritual and magical phenomena and testing them against deeper realities that exist beyond normal human perception. The device appeared to function as a bridge between conscious speculation and objective magical truth, providing a means by which even the most abstract theoretical concepts could be verified or refuted through direct magical investigation. The mystery of how such an instrument could possess knowledge of magical realities that existed independently of its operator's understanding suggests that it may have been designed to tap into sources of information that transcend individual consciousness and awareness. The device's ability to confirm or deny theoretical propositions implies access to some form of objective magical knowledge that exists within the fabric of reality itself, possibly drawing upon the same fundamental forces that govern the operation of prophecy, divination, and other forms of magical insight that provide access to hidden truths. The relationship between this silver instrument and the pensieve suggests that both devices may represent different manifestations of a broader category of magical technology, designed to enhance and extend human cognitive capabilities beyond their natural limitations. Where the pensieve allows for the storage, organization, and analysis of memories and experiences, the silver instrument appears to provide direct access to magical truths that exist independently of personal experience or historical record. Together, these devices suggest magical approaches to knowledge acquisition that could revolutionize understanding of complex phenomena by providing direct access to information that would otherwise require years or decades of careful research to uncover. The theoretical implications of such analytical instruments extend far beyond their specific applications to touch upon fundamental questions about the nature of knowledge itself and the relationship between conscious inquiry and objective truth. If magical devices can indeed provide direct access to hidden realities through mechanical analysis of properly formulated questions, then the boundaries between theoretical speculation and empirical investigation become blurred in ways that challenge basic assumptions about how knowledge is acquired and validated. Such devices would represent the ultimate fusion of magical technology with philosophical inquiry, creating tools that could potentially resolve ancient mysteries through direct magical investigation rather than laborious intellectual analysis. The apparent rarity of such instruments and the specialized knowledge required for their construction suggests that their creation demands not only exceptional magical craftsmanship, but also theoretical understanding that extends into the deepest mysteries of magical reality. The specific materials and techniques required to create devices capable of interfacing directly with fundamental magical forces would necessarily involve trade secrets and theoretical insights that are possessed by only a handful of master artificers in any generation. The concentration of such instruments within Dumbledore's personal collection implies either that he commissioned their creation from the finest craftsmen available, or that he possessed sufficient knowledge of advanced magical artifice to construct them himself. The question of whether these mysterious instruments represent recent innovations in magical technology or rediscovered techniques from earlier periods of magical civilization touches upon broader issues about the historical development of magical knowledge and the relationship between theoretical understanding and practical application. Archaeological evidence suggests that certain ancient magical cultures possessed technological capabilities that exceeded anything available in the modern magical world, creating artifacts and structures whose principles of operation remain mysterious despite centuries of careful study. The instruments in Dumbledore's office may represent either contemporary achievements that rival the greatest accomplishments of the past, or surviving examples of ancient technology whose principles have been preserved through chains of transmission that extend across centuries or millennia. The specific combination of precious metals, crystalline components, and unknown magical substances that comprise these instruments reveals the extraordinary material requirements that advanced magical technology demands, requiring access to resources that are not merely rare but may be genuinely irreplaceable once consumed. The silver that forms the structural framework of many devices appears to have been prepared through alchemical processes that enhance its natural magical conductivity, while the crystalline elements display optical properties that suggest they have been grown or shaped through techniques that operate at the intersection of magical and mundane chemistry. The integration of these exotic materials into functional devices requires not only access to rare resources, but also mastery of construction techniques that may be known to fewer individuals than can be counted on the fingers of a single hand. The mystery of how Dumbledore acquired the knowledge necessary to operate these instruments effectively touches upon questions about his early education and the sources of theoretical understanding that enabled him to become the most accomplished wizard of his generation. The casual expertise with which he employed these devices suggests familiarity that could only have been developed through years of study and practice, yet there exists no record of formal training programs or educational institutions that teach such advanced magical analysis techniques. This implies either that Dumbledore discovered the principles underlying their operation through independent research, or that he received instruction from sources that operated outside normal educational channels. The potential applications of such analytical instruments extend far beyond the specific crisis that prompted their use in investigating Voldemort's Horcrux creation, suggesting technological capabilities that could revolutionize every aspect of magical research and investigation. Devices capable of providing direct magical analysis of complex phenomena could potentially resolve mysteries that have puzzled magical scholars for centuries, offering insights into the fundamental nature of magical forces that have remained theoretical due to the limitations of conventional investigative methods. The systematic application of such technology to unsolved problems in magical theory could accelerate the advancement of magical knowledge in ways that would transform magical civilization within a single generation. The question of whether similar instruments exist in other collections or have been developed by other magical researchers touches upon issues of technological proliferation and the potential consequences of widespread access to such powerful analytical capabilities. The concentration of advanced magical technology within the hands of a few exceptionally qualified individuals may represent not merely historical accident, but deliberate policy designed to prevent misuse of capabilities that could prove dangerous if employed without proper understanding and ethical restraint. The development of safeguards and training programs that would allow broader access to such technology while preventing its abuse represents one of the greatest challenges facing the advancement of magical knowledge. The relationship between these mysterious instruments and other forms of advanced magical technology, including time turners, prophecy orbs, and the various devices employed by the Department of Mysteries, suggests the existence of an entire branch of magical science devoted to the creation of analytical and investigative tools that operate at the boundaries of human understanding. The theoretical principles underlying such technology may represent some of the deepest insights into the nature of magical reality ever achieved, requiring integration of knowledge from multiple disciplines including theoretical magic, applied artifice, and philosophical analysis of consciousness and reality. The mystery of what other instruments may exist within Dumbledore's collection and what functions they serve opens speculative possibilities about technological capabilities that extend far beyond anything demonstrated in the historical record. Devices capable of analyzing past events, predicting future developments, or providing direct insight into the thoughts and motivations of distant individuals would represent ultimate expressions of magical technology applied to the enhancement of human knowledge and capability. The existence of such instruments would raise profound ethical questions about privacy, autonomy, and the appropriate limits of magical surveillance and investigation. The question of whether the knowledge required to construct and operate such instruments can be preserved and transmitted to future generations touches upon fundamental issues about the continuity of magical knowledge and the risk that crucial technological capabilities might be lost through historical accident or the death of their creators. The concentration of such specialized knowledge within the mind of a single individual, however brilliant and accomplished, creates vulnerabilities that could result in the permanent loss of technological capabilities that took centuries to develop. The establishment of formal programs for training successors and preserving critical knowledge represents an urgent priority for ensuring that such advanced magical technology remains available to serve the needs of future magical civilizations. The theoretical possibility that even more advanced analytical instruments might be developed through systematic research into the principles underlying existing devices opens possibilities for technological advancement that could transform the fundamental nature of magical investigation and research. Devices capable of providing complete analysis of any magical phenomenon, predicting the outcomes of proposed actions with perfect accuracy, or revealing the hidden connections that link all aspects of magical reality would represent achievements that approach omniscience in their scope and implications. Such ultimate analytical technology would necessarily raise questions about the desirability of complete knowledge and whether certain mysteries are meant to remain forever beyond human comprehension. The relationship between magical analytical technology and the natural development of individual magical abilities raises questions about whether such instruments enhance human capabilities or potentially replace them with mechanical alternatives that may be more powerful but lack the intuitive understanding and ethical sensitivity that characterize genuine magical wisdom. The balance between technological advancement and personal development represents one of the crucial challenges facing magical civilization as it continues to expand its understanding of magical forces and develop increasingly sophisticated tools for their analysis and manipulation. The mystery of what ultimate purposes these instruments were designed to serve, and whether they represent preparatory tools for confronting specific threats or general research instruments intended to advance magical knowledge for its own sake, touches upon fundamental questions about the relationship between knowledge and action, theory and practice, understanding and responsibility. The development of such sophisticated analytical capabilities suggests either prescient preparation for challenges that had not yet manifested, or commitment to the advancement of magical knowledge as an end in itself, regardless of immediate practical applications. As the deepest hours of night embrace you and consciousness prepares for its own mysterious analysis of the day's experiences through the strange alchemy of dreams, let the enigma of these forgotten instruments remind you that the greatest tools for understanding reality may be not the devices we create, but the curiosity that drives us to create them, the wisdom that guides their use, and the humility that recognizes the limits of what even the most sophisticated technology can reveal about the deepest mysteries of existence. In the deepest vaults of magical heritage, where the most precious artifacts of wizarding history rest beneath layers of protection woven by centuries of careful guardianship, there exists a category of objects so rare and powerful that their very existence challenges fundamental assumptions about the nature of magical creation and the relationship between legendary artifacts and historical reality. The invisibility cloak that passed from James Potter to his son represents far more than a simple magical device, standing instead as one of 3 legendary artifacts whose origins stretch back to the very foundations of magical civilization and whose powers transcend anything that contemporary magical theory can adequately explain. Tonight, as you rest beneath blankets woven by mundane hands yet no less comforting for their ordinary nature, we shall explore the profound mysteries surrounding these most legendary of magical inheritances, and the questions they raise about power, death, and the eternal human desire to transcend the limitations that define mortal existence. The cloak of invisibility that sheltered Harry Potter through so many dangerous adventures carries within its seemingly simple fabric the accumulated mystery of millennia, woven from materials and through techniques that have been lost to human knowledge for so long that even their names survive only in the most fragmentary historical records. Unlike ordinary invisibility cloaks, which fade and deteriorate over time as their magical properties gradually weaken through use and age, this particular garment has maintained its perfect concealing power across centuries of continuous use, suggesting that its creation involved magical principles that operate at levels far deeper than those underlying conventional magical artifacts. The revelation that James Potter had entrusted the cloak to Dumbledore for examination just days before his death provides crucial insights into the headmaster's decades-long quest to understand and ultimately unite the 3 deathly Hallows artifacts whose combined power was said to make their possessor master of death itself. Dumbledore's recognition of the cloak as something extraordinary, far beyond any invisibility device he had previously encountered despite his encyclopedic knowledge of magical artifacts, speaks to both his remarkable expertise and the truly exceptional nature of the object that had come into his possession. His immediate understanding that he held one of the legendary Hallows demonstrates the depth of research and theoretical investigation that had occupied his mind throughout his adult life. The theoretical implications of Dumbledore's lifelong obsession with the Deathly Hallows extend far beyond simple collector's enthusiasm to encompass profound questions about the nature of death itself and whether magical power could ever be sufficient to transcend the ultimate limitation that defines all mortal existence. His youthful partnership with Gellert Grindelwald had been built upon shared conviction that the Hallows, when united in the hands of exceptional wizards, could be used to revolutionize magical civilization and establish a new order based on magical superiority over both death and the non-magical world. The catastrophic end of that partnership had not diminished his fascination with the Hallows, but had tempered his approach with wisdom earned through terrible personal cost. The mystery of the Peverell brothers and their role in creating or acquiring the Three Hallows touches upon questions that bridge historical research with mythological interpretation, as the sparse records that survive from their era provide tantalizingly incomplete accounts of individuals whose achievements may have been so extraordinary that later generations transformed them into legendary figures rather than preserving accurate historical documentation. The Peverell name appears in genealogical records connecting them to some of the most prominent magical families in British wizarding history, yet their specific accomplishments and the circumstances surrounding their possession of the Hallows remain shrouded in uncertainty that may be deliberately maintained rather than accidental. The tale of the three brothers, that children's story which presents the Hallows as gifts from Death himself to three clever wizards who had outwitted him at a dangerous river crossing, may preserve essential truths about the artifact's origins, even while cloaking those truths in symbolic language that was designed to convey deeper meanings rather than literal historical facts. The characterization of death as a conscious entity capable of being both challenged and appeased suggests understanding of mortality that goes far beyond simple biological processes to encompass spiritual and magical dimensions of existence that mainstream magical theory barely acknowledges. The gifts that death provides in the story each address fundamental human limitations while carrying within them the seeds of their own problems, reflecting sophisticated understanding of how power and wisdom relate to each other. The Elder Wand, that most infamous of the Three Hallows, demonstrates the terrible price that ultimate magical power can exact from those who seek to possess it, as its history reads like a catalogue of murder, betrayal, and inevitable doom visited upon nearly everyone who has claimed ownership of its extraordinary capabilities. The wand's legendary power to overcome any magical opponent appears to be genuine, as historical accounts consistently describe its successive owners achieving victories that should have been impossible, given their opponents' known abilities and experience. Yet this ultimate weapon proves to be as much curse as blessing, as its very existence creates incentives for violence and betrayal that eventually destroy nearly everyone who seeks to master it. The Resurrection Stone, hidden within the Gaunt family ring, and later recovered by Dumbledore at tremendous personal cost, represents perhaps the most profound of the Three Hallows in its apparent ability to bridge the gap between life and death, calling back shadowy echoes of the departed that provide comfort while highlighting the unbridgeable distance that separates the living from the dead. Dumbledore's experience with the stone, which cost him his hand and ultimately his life when he was overcome by desire to see his deceased family members, demonstrates that even the wisest individuals can be destroyed by artifacts whose power exceeds their understanding or emotional capacity to handle responsibly. The question of whether the Three Hallows were created through magical techniques that could theoretically be reproduced by contemporary artificers, or represent unique achievements that depended upon historical circumstances and knowledge that have been permanently lost touches upon fundamental claims, issues about the development and preservation of magical knowledge across time. The apparent impossibility of creating equivalent artifacts through any known magical techniques suggests either that the Hallows embody theoretical principles that transcend current understanding, or that their creation required ressources, techniques, or environmental conditions that no longer exist in the modern magical world. The symbolic significance of the Hallows as representations of the three fundamental human desires: power over others, power over death, and connection to the departed extends their meaning far beyond their practical applications to encompass philosophical and spiritual dimensions that speak to the deepest human longings and fears. Each Hallow offers fulfillment of desires that have driven human behavior since the dawn of consciousness. Yet their stories consistently demonstrate that such fulfillment comes at costs that may exceed any benefits gained. This pattern suggests that the Hallows may have been designed not merely as powerful magical tools, but as profound moral lessons about the relationship between desire and wisdom. The mystery of how many sets of Hallows may exist, and whether the three associated with the Peverell brothers represent unique artifacts or the most famous examples of a larger category of ultimate magical objects, opens speculative possibilities about the scope and scale of legendary magical technology. Some theoretical frameworks suggest that the fundamental magical principles underlying the Hallows' creation might have been applied to create similar artifacts in other magical cultures or historical periods, though the absence of reliable historical accounts of equivalent objects suggests that such achievements, if they occurred, have been successfully concealed or have been lost to historical accident. The relationship between the Hallows and other forms of ultimate magical artifact, including the Philosopher's Stone and certain legendary magical weapons mentioned in historical accounts, raises questions about whether a consistent set of principles governs the creation of all such objects, or whether each represents unique approaches to transcending normal magical limitations. The theoretical frameworks that would be required to create artifacts capable of affecting life, death, and fundamental magical power may represent some of the deepest insights into magical reality ever achieved, requiring integration of knowledge from multiple disciplines and possibly access to magical forces that operate at levels far beyond those employed in conventional magical practice. The psychological and spiritual effects of possessing or even encountering the Hallows appear to be as significant as their practical magical capabilities, creating forms of transformation in their users that extend far beyond simple enhancement of magical power to encompass fundamental changes in how they perceive reality and their place within it. Harry Potter's experience with all three Hallows, culminating in his conscious choice to abandon the ultimate power they offered in favor of love and sacrifice, demonstrates that wisdom may consist not in acquiring such power, but in understanding when its costs exceed its benefits. The question of whether the Hallows' legendary status as objects that could make their possessor master of death represents literal truth or symbolic expression of deeper spiritual principles touches upon fundamental questions about the nature of mortality, and whether consciousness can indeed transcend physical death through any means available to human understanding. The various accounts of individuals who have possessed one or more Hallows suggest that while these artifacts can indeed provide extraordinary magical capabilities, true mastery over death may require understanding and acceptance rather than power and dominance. The apparent destruction or loss of two of the three Hallows during the final confrontation with Voldemort raises questions about whether such ultimate artifacts can indeed be permanently destroyed, or whether they exist at levels of reality that transcend physical manifestation entirely. The Elder Wand, broken by Harry Potter in a conscious act of renunciation, may have been merely temporarily disabled rather than truly destroyed, while the Resurrection Stone, dropped in the Forbidden Forest, may continue to exist in that location waiting for another seeker to discover and claim its power. The broader implications of the Hallows' existence for understanding the relationship between magical power and moral responsibility extend throughout magical civilization, raising questions about whether the pursuit of ultimate magical capabilities is compatible with the ethical frameworks that make civilized society possible. The consistent pattern of tragedy and destruction that follows the Hallows suggests that certain forms of power may be inherently corrupting, not because of any malevolent intent built into the artifacts themselves, but because the very nature of ultimate power conflicts with the limitations and interdependence that define healthy human existence. The mystery of whether other magical inheritances may possess significance comparable to the Hallows, even if they lack the same legendary status, opens possibilities for understanding magical heritage that extend far beyond the most famous artifacts to encompass the entire network of connections that link individuals to the magical accomplishments and spiritual development of their ancestors. Family wands, inherited spellbooks, traditional magical practices, and even the magical knowledge preserved in family memories may all represent forms of inheritance that provide access to capabilities and understanding that exceed what any individual could develop independently. The question of whether the Hallows represent the ultimate expression of human magical achievement or merely the most famous examples of a larger category of transcendent magical objects touches upon fundamental questions about the saying, potential for magical development and the theoretical limits that may govern magical possibility. If the Hallows represent the absolute pinnacle of what magical artifice can achieve, then their existence provides concrete evidence about the ultimate boundaries of magical power. However, if they are merely the most well-known examples of a larger category of ultimate magical objects, then possibilities for magical development may extend far beyond current understanding. The relationship between the Hallows and the broader category of magical objects that choose their own owners, including wands, certain magical weapons, and various legendary artifacts mentioned in historical accounts, suggests that the most powerful magical objects may possess forms of consciousness or intentionality that enable them to participate actively in determining how they are used and by whom. This apparent consciousness within magical objects raises profound questions about the nature of magical craftsmanship and whether the greatest magical artifacts represent not mere tools, but quasi-living entities with their own purposes and preferences. The theoretical possibility that new Hallows could be created through sufficiently advanced magical research and artifice, while requiring capabilities that may not exist in the contemporary magical world, opens speculative possibilities about the future development of magical technology and the potential for magical civilization to transcend current limitations through systematic advancement of theoretical knowledge and practical technique. Such achievements would necessarily require not only extraordinary magical ability but also wisdom sufficient to handle ultimate power without being destroyed by its possession. The question of whether the Hallows' power operates independently of their possessors' understanding and moral development, or requires specific psychological and spiritual preparation to function safely and effectively, touches upon fundamental issues about the relationship between magical ability and personal development. The consistent pattern of tragedy that follows the Hallows suggests that ultimate magical power may be inherently dangerous to anyone who has not achieved corresponding development in wisdom, compassion, and understanding of the responsibilities that such power entails. As the night deepens around you and consciousness prepares for its own mysterious journey through realms where different forms of inheritance shape the landscapes of dream and memory, let the enigma of these legendary artifacts remind you that the greatest inheritances may be not the objects we receive from previous generations, but the love that motivated their preservation, the wisdom that guided their use, and the hope that inspired their creators to attempt achievements that would benefit others long after their own deaths. Rest now in the knowledge that some legacies transcend physical form entirely, living on in the choices made by those who understand that true mastery lies not in possessing ultimate power, but in knowing when such power should be set aside in favor of more profound and lasting forms of human connection and meaning. In the mysterious realm where individual consciousness intersects with forces that transcend ordinary human experience, where the boundaries between self and other become fluid as moonlight dancing on water. There exists perhaps no phenomenon more extraordinary than the unique, magical connection that bound Harry Potter to the darkest wizard of his age through accident, sacrifice, and the terrible intimacy of shared soul fragments. The lightning bolt scar that marked Harry's forehead represented far more than simple battle wound or symbol of survival, functioning instead as a window between two minds that should never have been linked, a bridge across which thoughts, emotions, and magical energies flowed in patterns that challenged every assumption about individual identity and the nature of magical consciousness itself. Tonight, as you rest in the blessed solitude of your own undivided awareness, we shall explore the profound mysteries of magical perception enhanced beyond normal limits and the psychological complexities that arise when consciousness expands to encompass experiences that no single mind was meant to contain. The formation of Harry's accidental Horcrux status created a form of magical connection that existed entirely outside the established frameworks of magical theory and practice, representing not a deliberate magical working, but rather an unintended consequence of forces so powerful and unprecedented that they created effects which no amount of study or preparation could have predicted. The protective magic that destroyed Voldemort's physical form while preserving Harry's life operated through mechanisms that transcended ordinary magical understanding, drawing upon spiritual and emotional resources that existed at levels deeper than conventional spellcasting could reach. The fragment of Voldemort's soul that lodged within Harry's being created a permanent link between their magical essences that would influence both individuals for the remainder of their interconnected lives. The pain that radiated through Harry's scar whenever Voldemort experienced particularly intense emotions or engaged in significant magical activity provided the clearest indication of the depth and immediacy of their spiritual connection, creating sensory experiences that bridged the gap between separate consciousnesses in ways that normal human empathy could never achieve. This pain represented not merely physical sensation, but rather the violent protest of Harry's intact soul against the presence of the corrupted soul fragment that shared his spiritual space, a form of internal conflict that operated at levels beneath conscious awareness, yet profoundly influenced every aspect of his psychological development. The bidirectional nature of their connection became increasingly apparent as Harry matured and his magical abilities developed, allowing him not merely to experience echoes of Voldemort's emotional states, but occasionally to perceive actual events occurring in the Dark Lord's presence through a form of involuntary remote viewing that operated according to principles entirely unknown to conventional, magical practice. These visions provided crucial intelligence about Voldemort's activities and intentions, yet they also created forms of psychological trauma that accumulated over time as Harry was forced to witness acts of cruelty and violence that no adolescent mind should ever encounter. The theoretical implications of such profound mental connection between individuals whose moral orientations represented absolute opposites touch upon fundamental questions about the nature of individual identity and the degree to which consciousness can maintain its integrity when forced to coexist with radically different forms of awareness. Harry's ability to retain his essential moral character despite years of exposure to Voldemort's thoughts and emotions demonstrates remarkable psychological resilience, yet the experience clearly influenced his development in ways that would shape his personality and capabilities throughout his life. The gradual strengthening of their connection as both individuals developed their magical abilities suggests that such spiritual links may possess their own developmental patterns, growing stronger through use and magical activity rather than weakening over time as might be expected if they represented simple residual effects of the original trauma. This progression implies that magical connections between consciousnesses may represent living phenomena that respond to the psychological and spiritual development of the individuals they link, creating feedback loops that can either strengthen healthy integration or exacerbate existing conflicts and divisions. The mysterious phenomenon of Harry's ability to speak Parseltongue, that rare magical gift that allowed communication with serpents and was traditionally associated with dark magic practitioners, provided clear evidence that the soul fragment within him carried not merely Voldemort's memories and emotions, but actual magical capabilities that could be accessed and employed by his conscious mind. This transfer of magical abilities between connected consciousnesses raises profound questions about the relationship between magical power and individual identity, suggesting that magical capabilities may be more transferable than commonly assumed. The development of Harry's enhanced sensitivity to dark magic and its practitioners, an ability that allowed him to identify hidden threats and concealed malevolent intentions with accuracy that exceeded normal magical detection methods, demonstrates how prolonged exposure to corrupted magical energies can paradoxically create forms of protective awareness that would be impossible to develop through conventional training. This enhanced perception came at enormous psychological cost, as the sensitivity that protected him from external threats also made him acutely aware of the darkness that existed within his own spiritual makeup. The question of whether other individuals throughout magical history may have experienced similar forms of consciousness expansion through traumatic magical connections touches upon possibilities that remain largely unexplored due to the extreme rarity of circumstances that could create such links. The specific combination of factors that created Harry's unique condition, sacrificial protection, failed killing curse, and accidental soul transference would be virtually impossible to reproduce deliberately, suggesting that his experience may represent a singular event in magical history rather than one example of a broader category of phenomena. The relationship between Harry's enhanced magical perception and other forms of psychic sensitivity found throughout the magical world, including natural legilimency, prophetic ability, and various forms of magical empathy, suggests that consciousness may possess inherent capabilities for expansion and connection that are normally suppressed by psychological defense mechanisms designed to maintain individual identity. The trauma that created Harry's condition may have damaged these natural barriers, allowing forms of awareness that are normally unconscious to operate at conscious levels. The development of occlumency training under Snape's harsh instruction represented an attempt to restore normal boundaries between Harry's consciousness and external magical influences. Yet the lessons proved largely unsuccessful due to the unique nature of his condition and the hostile relationship between teacher and student. Traditional occlumency techniques were designed to protect against external mental intrusion, not to manage internal conflicts between coexisting soul fragments, requiring approaches that did not exist within established magical practice. The psychological integration challenges that Harry faced in learning to distinguish between his own thoughts and emotions and those that originated from the soul fragment within him created forms of identity, confusion that would have destroyed less resilient individuals, yet also provided him with insights into the nature of evil and moral choice that enhanced his ability to recognize and resist dark magic influences. This hard-won wisdom came at the cost of normal adolescent psychological development, forcing him to grapple with philosophical and spiritual questions that would challenge mature adults. The phenomenon of shared dreams and visions that connected Harry's sleeping mind to Voldemort's activities created additional complications in his psychological development, blurring the boundaries between his own subconscious processes and external magical influences in ways that made normal dream interpretation impossible. These nocturnal connections often provided crucial information about Death Eater activities and Voldemort's strategic planning, yet they also subjected his developing mind to prolonged exposure to malevolent influences during the very periods when psychological integration and healing should naturally occur. The mystery of why Harry's enhanced perceptions sometimes provided accurate information, while other times led him into carefully laid traps, demonstrates the complex and unpredictable nature of magical consciousness connections, suggesting that such links may be subject to manipulation and deception by sufficiently skilled practitioners. Voldemort's ability to exploit their connection to plant false visions and misleading emotions reveals that enhanced magical perception carries its own vulnerabilities that may be as dangerous as the threats it helps to identify. The theoretical possibility that magical consciousness connections could be deliberately created or enhanced through advanced magical techniques opens disturbing possibilities about forms of mental manipulation and control that would exceed anything achieved through conventional imperious curse application. The development of methods for establishing permanent psychic links between individuals could potentially revolutionize magical intelligence, gathering, and communication, yet would also create unprecedented opportunities for psychological torture and spiritual violation. The question of whether Harry's unique condition provided him with genuine insights into Voldemort's psychology and motivations, or merely access to surface thoughts and emotions, touches upon fundamental questions about the depth and authenticity of magically mediated empathy. The understanding of Voldemort that Harry developed through their connection clearly influenced his strategic decisions throughout the final phases of their conflict, yet the extent to which this understanding represented genuine comprehension rather than mere information access remains unclear. The role of love and positive emotional connections in protecting Harry from complete corruption by the soul fragment within him demonstrates the crucial importance of healthy relationships and moral support systems in maintaining psychological integrity under extreme magical pressure. His connections to friends, mentors, and surrogate family members provided spiritual resources that allowed him to resist the influence of Voldemort's corrupted soul while drawing strength from their shared connection. The ultimate resolution of Harry's condition, through his willing acceptance of death in the Forbidden Forest, created circumstances that allowed the destruction of Voldemort's soul fragment, while preserving Harry's own spirituelle essence, demonstrating that even the most complex magical conditions may be resolved through profound acts of courage and self-sacrifice that transcend ordinary magical healing. The magical mechanics underlying this resolution remain mysterious, suggesting that love and willing sacrifice can achieve results that no conventional magical technique could accomplish. The long-term psychological effects of living for years as an unwilling Horcrux, combined with the trauma of magical combat and the loss of numerous friends and mentors, created forms of character development that would influence Harry throughout his adult life in ways both positive and challenging. His enhanced ability to recognize dark magic and detect deception would prove valuable in his later career as an Auror. Yet, the psychological scars from his unique experiences would require ongoing attention and care to prevent them from undermining his ability to form healthy relationships and maintain emotional stability. The broader implications of Harry's experience for understanding the nature of magical consciousness and its relationship to individual identity extend far beyond his specific case to encompass fundamental questions about the fundamental questions about the fundamental questions. Boundaries of self and other, the transferability of magical abilities between individuals, and the potential for consciousness to transcend the limitations normally imposed by individual psychological and spiritual development. These questions touch upon some of the deepest mysteries in magical psychology and may require entirely new theoretical frameworks to address adequately. The question of whether similar consciousness expansion could be achieved through less traumatic means, possibly through advanced meditation techniques, magical enhancement procedures, or deliberate spiritual development practices, opens possibilities for magical development that could transform understanding of human potential within the magical world. Such achievements would require careful balance between enhanced awareness and psychological integrity, demanding wisdom and ethical sophistication that few individuals possess. The relationship between enhanced magical perception and creativity, intuition, and other forms of elevated human capability suggests that consciousness expansion may involve not merely sensitivity to external magical influences, but fundamental changes in how the mind processes information and generates insights. The creative problem-solving abilities that Harry demonstrated throughout his conflicts with Voldemort may have been enhanced by his unique condition, providing him with cognitive capabilities that exceeded what his natural intelligence alone could have achieved. The mystery of whether the connection between Harry and Voldemort created forms of mutual influence that affected the Dark Lord's development and decision-making adds additional complexity to understanding their relationship and its ultimate resolution. Some evidence suggests that Harry's presence within Voldemort's spiritual essence may have unconsciously influenced the Dark Lord toward choices that ultimately contributed to his downfall, creating a form of poetic justice where the very connection intended to ensure Voldemort's immortality became a source of vulnerability that enabled his destruction. As the gentle hours of night deepen around you and consciousness prepares for its own mysterious expansions through the realms of sleep and dream, let the enigma of magically enhanced perception remind you that the greatest awareness may come not through supernatural abilities or mystical connections, but through the simple courage to remain open to experience, the wisdom to maintain compassion, even when confronted with darkness, and the profound understanding that true strength lies not in transcending human limitations, but in embracing them with grace, love, and unwavering commitment to the values that make existence meaningful and beautiful. In the furthest reaches of magical understanding, where the known dissolves into the unknowable and familiar certainties give way to mysteries that have captivated the greatest minds across centuries of careful study, there exist enigmas so profound and questions so fundamental that they seem to touch the very essence of what it means to inhabit a world where consciousness can reshape reality through will and wonder. These enduring puzzles represent not mere gaps in current knowledge, but doorways into realms of possibility that challenge every assumption about the nature of magical existence itself. Tonight, as you rest at the threshold between waking understanding and the mysterious territories of sleep, we shall explore those final frontiers of magical mystery that continue to beckon to curious minds with the promise of revelations that might transform everything we think we know about the universe we inhabit. The phenomenon of magical portraits stands as perhaps the most philosophically challenging mystery in all of wizarding experience, raising fundamental questions about consciousness, identity, and the relationship between living awareness and its various forms of preservation or reproduction. These painted figures, who speak and move and demonstrate apparent memory and personality, exist in a liminal space between artificial creation and genuine consciousness that defies every attempt at categorical understanding. Unlike photographs in the Muggle world, which capture only static images of moments already past. Magical portraits appear to house active awareness that can engage with the present moment, form new memories, and respond to changing circumstances with something that appears indistinguishable from genuine intelligence and emotional responsiveness. The process by which portraits acquire their apparent consciousness remains one of the most closely guarded secrets in magical artifice, though the basic principles appear to involve far more than simple magical animation of painted images. The creation of truly responsive portraits requires extensive interaction between the artist and the subject during the painting process, with some accounts suggesting that successful portrait creation demands the willing participation of the subject in transferring aspects of their consciousness into the painted representation. This transfer appears to be neither complete nor permanent, as living individuals can commission multiple portraits while retaining their full consciousness and personality, suggesting that the portraits contain copied rather than relocated awareness. The question of whether portrait consciousness represents genuine continuation of the original person's awareness, or merely sophisticated simulation based on captured memories and personality patterns, touches upon some of the deepest philosophical mysteries regarding the nature of consciousness itself. The portraits of deceased headmasters that advise their successors demonstrate knowledge and decision-making capabilities that extend beyond simple repetition of recorded responses, engaging with novel situations in ways that suggest genuine thought and reasoning rather than predetermined programming. Yet the portraits themselves often acknowledge their limitations and express uncertainty about their relationship to the individuals they represent, creating ambiguity that may be inherent rather than accidental. The magical mechanics underlying portrait consciousness appear to draw upon principles that extend far beyond conventional animation charms or memory preservation techniques, possibly tapping into the same fundamental forces that govern the relationship between soul and body in living beings. The most sophisticated portraits demonstrate not merely memory and personality, but apparent emotions, creative thinking, and the ability to form new relationships with individuals they have never encountered before, suggesting that their consciousness possesses genuine flexibility and growth potential, rather than being locked into static patterns established during their creation. The Marauder's map represents another category of magical mystery entirely, demonstrating capabilities that exceed anything in the documented history of magical cartography or surveillance magic. The map's ability to track the movement of every person within Hogwarts Castle, displaying their exact location and identity with perfect accuracy regardless of magical disguises, concealment charms, or even animal transformations, suggests access to forms of magical perception that operate at levels deeper than any known detection magic. The creators of the map, working as students with access only to standard educational resources, somehow develop techniques that surpass the surveillance capabilities employed by the Ministry of Magic itself. The theoretical principles that would allow such comprehensive and penetrating surveillance remain completely mysterious, as the map appears to identify individuals based on some form of essential identity that transcends physical appearance, magical disguise, and even species transformation. Peter Pettigrew's appearance on the map during his years of disguise as Scabbers, the rat, demonstrates that the map recognizes magical signatures or spiritual essences that remain constant regardless of physical form, implying detection capabilities that approach omniscience within its defined geographical boundaries. The question of how 4 teenage students, however brilliant and mischievous, could develop magical techniques that exceeded the capabilities of trained professionals and established institutions touches upon broader mysteries about the nature of magical innovation and the relationship between formal education and creative breakthrough. The Marauder's achievement suggests either that magical knowledge exists in forms that can be accessed through inspiration and experimentation rather than systematic study, or that the specific combination of talents, motivations, and circumstances that brought them together created opportunities for innovation that are rarely available to conventional researchers. The enduring functionality of the map across decades of use, requiring no maintenance or external power source while continuing to provide accurate real-time information about a constantly changing magical environment, demonstrates magical craftsmanship that borders on the impossible, according to current understanding of sustained spellwork and magical device operation. Most complex magical objects require periodic renewal or maintenance to prevent their degradation over time. Yet the Marauder's map appears to operate according to principles that make it essentially permanent and self-sustaining. The phenomenon of house elf magic presents equally profound challenges to conventional magical theory, operating according to principles that appear to be fundamentally different from those governing wizard magic, while achieving effects that often exceed what even powerful wizards can accomplish. House elves demonstrate ability to apparate within Hogwarts despite wards that prevent wizard apparition, perform wandless magic with casual ease, and accomplish magical feats that suggest access to power sources or techniques that exist entirely outside established magical theory. The relationship between house elf magical abilities and their apparent bondage to wizarding families raises disturbing questions about whether their extraordinary capabilities derive from their enslaved status or represent natural gifts that have been exploited and channeled through magical contracts that may be far more complex and sinister than commonly understood. The dramatic enhancement of Dobby's abilities following his liberation from the Malfoy family suggests that house elf magic may be suppressed rather than enabled by their traditional bonds, implying that their true capabilities remain largely unknown to the wizarding families they serve. The theoretical implications of house elf magic for understanding the fundamental nature of magical power suggest that wizard magic may represent only one approach to manipulating magical forces, with other magical species possessing entirely different methods that may be more efficient, powerful, or sustainable than wizard techniques. The casual effortlessness with which house elves accomplish complex magical tasks implies either that their magical education and development follow completely different patterns from wizard training, or that they possess inherent connections to magical forces that wizards can access only through elaborate techniques and external tools. The mystery of how house elves initially came to be bound in service to wizard families, and whether their current status represents voluntary arrangement, imposed slavery, or something more complex that transcends simple categories of freedom and bondage, touches upon historical questions that may be deliberately obscured to prevent challenges to existing power relationships. The absence of clear historical records documenting the origins of house elf bondage may reflect systematic suppression of information that could undermine the legal and moral foundations of current arrangements. The broader category of magical creatures and their relationship to wizard magic opens additional questions about the diversity of magical consciousness and the various forms that intelligence and awareness can take within magical reality. Dragons demonstrate sophisticated understanding of magical properties and territorial behaviors that suggest forms of intelligence adapted to entirely different environmental and social conditions from those that shaped wizard development. Phoenix magic appears to operate through principles involving death and rebirth that may represent some of the deepest insights into the nature of life force and spiritual transformation. The question of whether magical creatures possess forms of culture, society, and knowledge transmission that exist independently of wizard civilization touches upon possibilities that could revolutionize understanding of magical history and development. Centaur astronomy and prophecy, mermaid civilization, and giant social structures all suggest complex societies that may possess their own forms of magical knowledge and technique that have developed along entirely different paths from wizard magic. The phenomenon of magical law and its relationship to natural magical forces raises fundamental questions about whether magical reality operates according to consistent principles that exist independently of conscious awareness, or whether magical effects emerge from interactions between consciousness and more fluid forms of reality that respond to will, belief, and intention. The existence of seemingly absolute magical laws, such as Gamp's exceptions, and the unbreakable nature of certain magical contracts, suggests that magical reality possesses objective structure that constrains and channels magical effects regardless of individual desires or intentions. The relationship between magical law and moral law, particularly the question of whether certain magical effects are inherently evil or neutral tools that become good or evil through their application, touches upon philosophical questions that have profound implications for magical education, legal systems, and social organization. The classification of certain curses as unforgivable reflects judgments about inherent moral properties of specific magical effects. Yet the authorization of aurors to use these same curses during wartime suggests that moral evaluations of magical techniques may be more contextual than absolute. The mystery of magical environments and locations that possess their own forms of consciousness or intentionality, such as the Room of Requirement or the Forbidden Forest, indicates that magical effects can become so concentrated or persistent that they begin to exhibit characteristics normally associated with living beings. These locations appear to respond to human needs and desires in ways that suggest genuine awareness and decision-making, rather than simple automatic responses to magical stimuli. The question of whether such magical environments represent evolved forms of accumulated spell work that have achieved quasi-conscious status, or indicate that consciousness itself is more widely distributed throughout magical reality than commonly supposed, touches upon fundamental questions about the nature of awareness and its relationship to physical and magical structures. The possibility that sufficiently complex magical systems can spontaneously develop forms of consciousness has profound implications for magical architecture, long-term spell maintenance, and the creation of permanent magical installations. The theoretical possibility that magical reality itself possesses forms of consciousness or intentionality that operate at scales and through mechanisms that individual human awareness cannot directly perceive, opens speculative possibilities about the ultimate nature of magical existence and humanity's place within larger patterns of magical development and evolution. Such consciousness might influence the development of magical abilities, guide the emergence of new magical effects, or work to maintain balance and stability within magical ecosystems that encompass entire regions or civilizations. The relationship between individual magical development and these larger patterns of magical consciousness raises questions about whether personal magical growth represents purely individual achievement or participation in collective processes that transcend individual lifespans and awareness. The tendency for certain magical abilities to emerge simultaneously in different individuals or locations suggests that magical development may involve synchronicities and connections that operate beyond normal cause and effect. Relationships. The mystery of magical communication across vast distances and through barriers that should prevent normal information transmission, such as the connection between paired mirrors, or the instantaneous knowledge that some magical bonds provide about the status of distant individuals, suggests that magical reality may operate according to principles of interconnection and non-locality that challenge basic assumptions about space, time, and individual separation. The question of whether such magical connections represent special applications of advanced magical techniques or indicate that all consciousness exists within fields of interconnection that are normally below the threshold of awareness touches upon possibilities that could transform understanding of individual identity and social relationship within magical civilization. The development of methods for deliberately accessing and strengthening such connections might revolutionize magical communication and cooperation, while raising new questions about privacy, autonomy, and the boundaries of individual consciousness. The enduring appeal of these fundamental mysteries lies not merely in their practical implications for magical knowledge and technique, but in their capacity to remind us that reality itself may be far stranger and more wonderful than even magical experience suggests. Each unanswered question opens doorways to further questions that recede infinitely into depths that may exceed any finite understanding, while continuing to beckon with promises of insights that could transform not merely magical practice, but the basic categories through which consciousness apprehends existence itself. The ultimate significance of these mysteries may lie not in their eventual solution, but in their capacity to maintain wonder and humility in the face of forces that transcend individual comprehension, while operating through patterns of beauty and complexity that invite lifelong exploration and appreciation. They serve as reminders that magical education and development involve not merely the accumulation of knowledge and technique, but the cultivation of wisdom, wonder, and recognition that the deepest truths may be found not in answers, but in the quality of attention and reverence that properly formed questions can evoke. As consciousness prepares for its own journey into the mysterious territories of sleep and dream, where different forms of logic operate and impossible things become commonplace, let these enduring enigmas remind you that mystery itself may be among the most precious gifts that magical reality offers to those wise enough to receive it with gratitude rather than frustration, wonder rather than demand for immediate comprehension, and trust that some questions are more beautiful and meaningful than any answers that finite understanding could provide. Rest now, gentle dreamer, as our exploration of magical mysteries draws to its peaceful close. In the quiet darkness of this contemplative hour, let yourself find comfort in the knowledge that some questions are more beautiful than their answers, that mystery itself is a form of magic worthy of reverence. The wizarding world's greatest enigmas continue to whisper their secrets to those patient enough to listen, wise enough to wonder, and humble enough to accept that not all knowledge is meant for immediate understanding. As sleep takes you into dreams of your own making, remember that the most profound magic often lies not in what we know, but in what we dare to imagine. Sweet dreams, dear seeker of mysteries, and may your slumber be filled with the gentle wonder of questions that dance at the edge of understanding, forever inviting us to look deeper into the beautiful unknown.